Chapter 124. The next day, the carriage returned to the Qinghe town with Xiaowu and Datian's expectations for the future and Wang Lijua's anxiety. For Wang Lijua's request, Su Li temporarily allowed him to stay with Xiaowu to see the world, and Wang Li didn't stop him. In her opinion, it was a great joy that her son could get on the good side of a miss in the town. She was very happy. How could she stop him? Soon after Su Li and others left, there was a big mess in the Yingguang town. More than 100 charred corpses transported from the blood refining hall were inexplicably less than half. Only the corpses without limbs were left. The rest of the corpses seemed to have come back to life. They ran away from the mass grave without leaving any trace of human activities. The county magistrate was frightened and had a serious illness. He sent people out to find the whereabouts of the corpses, but they couldn't find them. Su Li, how can we complete the construction of the hillside? When Xiaowu and others went to prepare the dinner, Chu Qingning couldn't help but come over and whispered, "It is such a big hillside. Even if we send a team of 50 craftsmen, it will take about a month to complete it. What's more, we don't have the ability to find 50 craftsmen who can keep secrets for us. And this time, don't you draw a design drawing like the Linli building? The secluded land is not a restaurant. It doesn't need to be too fancy." Su Li responded indifferently. She didn't mention the construction of the hillside. Instead, she said, "After returning to the Qinghe town, you can start to recruit new people secretly and send them to the secluded land every half a month. As for the secluded land, I will choose one of the 4 of you to manage it." Half a month. So fast. Chu Qingning was speechless and immediately shrank his neck. He didn't want to go to the remote place and order a group of teenagers all day long. Just thinking about it made him feel painful. Besides, he didn't want to be separated from Yin Xuedong. Thinking of this, Chu Qingning leaned to Su Li's ear and suggested, "I think the most suitable ones are Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen. They both put on a grim face all day long. It is daunting just to look at them. They can definitely deter newcomers more than me." Chu Qingning lingered beside Su Li for a long time, but he didn't hear any affirmative words from her. When he heard Xiaowu calling for dinner outside, he could only leave helplessly. He still had doubts in his heart, such as why Su Li was able to clear out the mountainside in half a month. But he knew that Su Li would not answer these questions even if he asked. After Chu Qingning left, Su Li looked back at the lush and quiet mountain forest and narrowed her eyes slightly. Dead people are the best at keeping secrets, aren't they? A few days later, they finally returned to the Qinghe town. The way back was unusually peaceful. They didn't even meet a single robber. The news that this area had been wiped out half a month ago had spread. The remaining robbers didn't dare to stay here for long and all changed places. Wang Lijue entered the city and looked around. His face was full of curiosity and excitement. Xiaowu could not help but laugh. This boy used to be the same as his mother, but now he had changed his temperament, which made him pleasing to the eye. At noon, the business of the Linli building was at its peak. Su Li's carriage stopped behind the Linli building. Haydn and others were stunned for a while before they reacted. Then they were ecstatic and said, "She is back. She is back. Boss and others are all back." Mei Ruhan, who was still doing accounts in the room, immediately stood up and ran to the back door happily. When she saw Yin Xuedong looking at her with a smile, she felt sad and immediately burst into tears. Then she threw herself into Yin Xuedong's arms. "Great! You are finally back. I thought I couldn't hold on anymore." Yin Xuedong gently patted Mei Ruhan's back, and her eyes were slightly wet. Mei Ruhan could be regarded as her half-apprentice. Now it was hard for her to control the Linli building for half a month. Su Li glanced at the lively scene in the front hall and nodded with a smile, "Well done. She is like a shopkeeper. Mei Ruhan blushed and waved her hand. It's all because of your reputation that the Linli building is not targeted by thieves. Ruhan actually didn't do anything. At this time, Luo Chen came. His expression was still the same as that of half a month ago. It seemed that everyone owed him money. Here's what you want. Luo Chen directly put a pink package in Su Li's hand and then turned away. He didn't want to have anything to do with this thing. Su Li looked at Luo Chen's back and was not angry. She turned to Haydn and others and asked, "How is it in the city recently?" Haydn and others were the first to follow Su Li. They had been paying attention to the movements in the city, so they directly talked at once. After an hour, everyone dispersed and the Linli building returned to normal. In the attic on the top floor, Su Li picked up a brush and wrote 2 words on the paper, Wu Yun. With the help of her 1 million taels of silver, the Yen family was not defeated in the business competition. But they didn't win all the money. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate. As the saying went, a powerful dragon could not suppress a local snake. The power of the Yen family was deeply rooted in the Qinghe town. If Wu Yun wanted to fight against it, the price to pay was definitely far more than 1 million taels of silver. Presumably, even she felt a little bit overwhelmed. There is no turning back. Wu Yun, if I were you, what would I do next? In the Qinghe girls' school, Su Li appeared at the door in a yellow gauze dress. When the guards saw Su Li, they immediately surrounded her with surprise and said with a smile, "Lecturer Su, you finally come back. We haven't seen you for half a month. We miss you very much." Su Li showed a gentle and bright smile and handed over the basket in her hand. She said, "The scenery of the Yinguang town beside the Qinghe River is good. This is a local specialty. I bought a lot. You can have a taste." The guards were overjoyed and quickly took it. Then they looked a little strange. They looked around and whispered, "Miss Su, are you really from the Su family in the Daisu town?" Su Li was still smiling, but there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. She said, "Of course. Why do you ask?" The guard quickly waved his hand and said, "No, no, no. I don't doubt the identity of Lecturer Su. It's just that the temperament of your family. It's hard to imagine that they can cultivate such an excellent person as you." "Oh." Su Li's smile slowly disappeared. She said, "So, have you seen someone in the Su family?" "More than that. I have seen all of them." The guard took it for granted. Then he patted his head when he saw that Su Li was still doubtful. He said, "Look at me. It seems that you didn't know when your family came to the school." At that time, Mrs. Su was so fierce that Dean Wen was very angry. Su Li slightly pursed her lips, and a dim light flashed in her eyes. At this time, the whole Su family came to the Qinghe town. After a quarter of an hour, Su Li appeared in the courtyard of Wen Ruomin. Seeing Su Li come back, Wen Ruomin was happy at first. Then she took Su Li's hand and sat down. She frowned and asked, "Su Li, do you know that all of your family members came to the Qinghe town?" "I heard it from the guards, but I don't know what happened." Seeing Su Li's obedient answer, Wen Ruomin showed an indescribable expression, "I don't like to gossip behind people's backs. It's just that your parents are really, I know." Su Li looked calm and showed a faint smile, "But since I was born in the Su family, I can only accept the result. After all, God doesn't give me the right to choose my parents. Besides, I have an elder brother who loves me, and that's enough." Su Li's words made Wen Ruomin feel more distressed. She would rather Su Li tell her about the suffering she suffered in the Su family these years than bear it silently. The school never allows outsiders to come in, even the relatives of the lecturers of the school. I spend a lot of effort to send them away from the gate of the school. But I heard that they are still in the Qinghe town. They should live in the Fulai Inn. When Ruomin told Su Li about Su Huanli and others. Then she cautiously exhorted, I have told them that the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school has no real power. Don't expose that you are the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Otherwise, you will be in big trouble. If the Su family really knew that Su Li was the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop, when Ruomin could imagine that Su Huanli and others would force Su Li to take advantage of her identity and give the green light to the silk shop industry of the Su family. Once the Jin family and the Lin family got hold of it, even the Yen family would be in trouble. It was not a joke. I see. Su Li nodded and looked calm. She said, even if someone told them, I would not do that. Even if I have to bear the name of unfilial, I can't let Ding Gong and you down. And she couldn't let Yan Shishuan fail in this battle. Otherwise, wouldn't her 1,000,000 taels of silver be in vain? Child, it's really hard for you. When Ruomin sighed deeply. She had heard from Ning Yunji that Su Li was an out-and-out filial daughter. No matter how the Su family treated her, she always had no complaints or regrets. But now, she was asked to violate her own beliefs. What a sin. After saying goodbye to Wen Ruomin, Su Li didn't go back to the courtyard of the school. Instead, she directly left the school and walked to the Fulai Inn. The guards at the gate sighed again and again, as if they had seen a sheep falling into a tiger's mouth. In the Fulai Inn. When the waiter saw Su Li coming, he immediately came to her with a big smile and asked, What do you want? Do you want to have a meal or stay in the inn? Su Li showed a very reluctant smile and gently said, I'm Su Li. The waiter was so shocked that his eyes widened, and then he bowed to salute Su Li. Few people had seen Su Li's appearance, but her name had already spread throughout the Qinghe town. It could be said that everyone in the Qinghe town knew her. Lecturer Su, you finally come. I will take you to see Master Su. The waiter led the way for Su Li up the stairs and spat, Master Su has owed 10 days' rent. Because of your face, our shopkeeper can't drive them away, so he can only delay it. Anyway, they are the 3 main branches. It's not a good thing to delay it all the time. Fortunately, we have been looking forward to the stars and the moon. Finally, you come. Lecturer Su. Lecturer Su. Before the waiter continued to say anything, a round fat man climbed up the stairs flexibly downstairs and said, I heard that you went to the Qinghe River to relax. You have been gone for more than half a month. I miss you so much. Su Li looked indifferent and slightly nodded. You must be the boss of the Fulai Inn, Wang Fulai. Yes, I am. The fat man wiped the sweat on his head and rebuked the waiter. He licked his face and said with a smile, Fortunately, Lecturer Su remembers my name. Are you here for Master Su and Madam Su? Su Li gently said, Wang Fulai immediately led the way in front with enthusiasm. The Fulai Inn had a total of 3 floors. The higher the floor, the more upscale and expensive it was. Wang Fulai took Su Li to the best 3 rooms of the inn and stopped. These 3 rooms are all Tianzi rooms with 50 taels of silver a night. Your family has occupied them for 10 days. I can't help it. Anyway, you are a teacher. You should be reasonable and take your family away quickly. Chapter 125. Hearing the noise outside, Wang Fulai was about to say something, but the door of the Tianzi room was opened with a squeak. Su Huanli stared blankly at the 2 people standing outside the door. Then he said happily, Li, you finally come. Li, you come. Zhu Yan immediately came out of the room. She saw that Su Li was dressed delicately and had a better temperament and appearance than when she was in the Desu town. She couldn't help but have a strong sense of crisis. She must take advantage of this time to completely solve Su Li. If she continued to grow, when she arrived in Yunjing, her origin would be exposed. Thinking of this, Zhu Yan showed an unprecedented gentle smile to Su Li. Our Li is getting more and more beautiful. Second sister. Su Zipei helped Ma'am Su Chui to come out from the next room. Her eyes were shining brightly, as if she had always admired Su Li. Second sister, our parents were so happy when they heard that you became the special class lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School. We all came to see you immediately. Only the second mother stayed at home to look after the Baiwei building. She couldn't leave. Su Zipei said with a smile. She held Su Li's arm intimately. Wang Fulai looked at them and couldn't help but sigh. He didn't expect that Su Li had a good relationship with the Su family. The rumors were exaggerated. Anyway, they were relatives. Looking at the performance of Su Zipei and her daughter, Su Li didn't feel anything, but she was happy and excited. She said, "Dad, Mom, you are taking a lot of trouble. I will go back to see you when I am free. There is no need to be tired. Well, let's not talk about it." Su Huanli didn't let Su Li entangle on this issue for too long. He waved his hand and said, "Your identity is different now. You are a big shot in the Qinghe town. Wherever I go, I can hear your name. Let's go to your residence first and then talk about it in detail." Su Li was embarrassed and said, "I live in the school. You know the rules of the Qinghe Girls' School. Outsiders are not allowed to go in." "Even I, how can you talk like that?" "Ma'am." Su Chui pulled a long face and pinched Su Li's hand fiercely. "How can we be outsiders? Your father has already said so. Don't you have any conscience? We're right behind you. Do you think the academy's guards would dare to stop us?" Su Li's face darkened. "The rules of the Qinghe Girls' School can't be broken. I am just a lecturer, not the dean. Don't tell me you want your granddaughter to lose her position as a lecturer." "You?" "Ma'am." Su Chui suddenly became speechless. Her wrinkled face turned red. After a long time, she pulled her son's sleeve and pretended to cry. "Son, look. How long has this girl been in Qinghe town? You've even learned to talk back. This is really going against the heavens. What kind of sin has my Su family committed?" Su Huanli's face was also very ugly. He looked at Su Li very coldly. He vowed to his mother that after he came to the Qinghe town, it would be very easy for him to open a branch of the Baiwei building under the care of Su Li. Unexpectedly, there was no place for him to stay. Second sister. "I say, how can you be so vicious? Do you really have the heart to let us all sleep on the streets? Li, how did your mother teach you? Why don't you know filial piety at all? Do you have to make your mother completely sad?" In the twinkling of an eye, the intimate family meeting turned into a meeting to chase after Su Li. Wang Fulai was dumbfounded by the sight. It seemed that rumors could sometimes be believed. Seeing a group of people grabbing Su Li and wanting to teach her a lesson, Wang Fulai couldn't bear it and immediately interrupted. "Dear guests, it's not too late to solve it at home. Shouldn't you pay for the rooms? 3 rooms cost 150 taels a day, which means 1,500 taels for 10 days. Thank you for your patronage." "What? 1,500 taels?" Zhu Yan suddenly screamed, "It's a robbery. Do you think that your inn is the Jade Emperor's bedroom?" Seeing that Zhu Yan didn't want to pay, Wang Fulai sneered and said, "You live in the most luxurious Tianzi room. There are only a few of them in the entire Qinghe town. If you dare to refuse to pay, just leave. Otherwise, I will invite you to the government office regardless of lecturer Su's feelings. My granddaughter is the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Her status is no less than that of the satrap." "Ma'am." Su Chui stood out with a gloomy face and said, "I'd like to see how you, an innkeeper, send the family of the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop to prison." Wang Fulai was so angry that he took a deep breath and almost choked. He had opened the inn for so many years, but it was the first time that he saw such a shameless family. "Enough." Hearing that, ma'am, Su Chui said, workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Su Li's eyes slightly sank and she finally shouted. The whole corridor was suddenly quiet. "Ma'am." Su Chui, who was still quarreling with Wang Fulai, turned around in surprise. It was the first time that she saw Su Li get angry. Even when they almost drowned Su Li in the pig cage last year, she was not so angry. Did Su Li really change after staying in the Qinghe town for half a year? Su Li took a deep breath and took out the only broken silver from her arms. Almost all the money of the Linli building was invested in the fight between the Yan family and the Jin family. She really had no money now. Of course, even if she had money, she would not take it out. "Shopkeeper, I am sorry. I only have more than 500 taels of silver. I haven't received the salary of the embroidery workshop yet. After I receive the salary, I will ask someone to send you the remaining 1,000 taels of silver. Is that okay?" Facing Su Li's sincere and apologetic eyes, Wang Fulai was stunned and said nothing. His eyes gradually became complicated. "It is obviously not your fault, Lecturer Su. Why should you bear the sins of your family?" After a long time, Wang Fulai took the broken silver in Su Li's hand and said helplessly, "Although I don't want it, I also support a group of people in the inn. I will take the silver. As for your family..." Alas, it is really not easy for Lecturer Su to stay unstained in the mud. Wang Fulai took the silver and walked away with a speechless expression. On both sides of the corridor, many people stretched out their heads and secretly observed the development of the situation. Those who could live here were naturally from rich families. Naturally, many people were interested in the gossip of the youngest special class lecturer in the Qinghe town. With so many people watching, Su Huanli and others couldn't help but feel embarrassed even if they were thick-skinned. They pulled Su Li to leave the inn. "Dad, Mom, you all go back. I really can't arrange a residence for you, unless you are willing to live in a cheap inn," Su Li said helplessly in a pleading tone. "Ma'am." Su Chui snorted coldly. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Su Li's purse. When she opened it and saw that there were a few pieces of silver left, she believed Su Li's words and threw the purse to the ground. "Useless thing. I thought that your identity could bring some benefits to the Su family. What a waste of effort. Grandma, don't be angry. Maybe Su Li is hiding something from us. Let's not rush to leave." "Yes, Mom. Let's find a poorer inn to live in. Let's go to the embroidery workshop tomorrow." Su Li picked up the purse and stood up slowly. She watched Su Huanli and others go farther and farther, but she clearly heard they were talking about something in a low voice. Her eyes flashed with a dark light, and then she silently followed him. Wu Yun, who was observing in the dark, saw this scene and couldn't help but smile triumphantly. Humans are really inferior animals with weaknesses. Your Yan family is strict in defense. It is impossible for you to think that I will find another way. That night, Su Li arranged for Su Huanli and others to live in an ordinary inn. It cost only a few hundred copper coins a night. Of course, she paid the silver. With Su Li, such a soft persimmon, even if the Su family had accumulated a lot of wealth through the byway building, they would not hesitate to exploit Su Li. After entering the inn, Zhu Yan and Mam Su Chui told everyone that they were Su Li's biological mother and grandmother. The atmosphere was so embarrassing. Finally, everyone felt bored and let Su Li go. After Su Li returned to the Linli building, Fang Yuan and others who had heard the news immediately surrounded her. The old guys of the Su family actually came to the Qinghe town. It's weird. It's definitely weird. Chu Qingning said with certainty. Su Huanli has always been a person who won't release the hawk until he sees the hare. If there were no absolute benefits waiting for him in the Qinghe town, how could he leave the Baiwei building to the second madam and come to the Qinghe town with his whole family to find Su Li? Fang Yuan didn't speak but nodded in agreement. He had the same opinion as Chu Qingning. Yin Xuedong and Fang Mu both joined Su Li after she came to the Qinghe town, so they didn't know Su Li's family affairs. Now they suddenly heard that there was a group of people behind Su Li, which really surprised them. Wasn't Su Li supposed to be born in a hidden family or a disciple with special abilities? How could she be the second miss of an ordinary businessman's family in a small town? Such a contrast was too big, wasn't it? Ignoring the two people's dumbfounded look, Su Li pushed the two words on the table to Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning. Wu Yun. Chu Qingning was confused and said, "Is the matter of the Su family related to Wu Yun?" "There is no connection at all. Shouldn't Wu Yun be worried about the Jin family and the Lin family now?" Fang Yuan's pupils shrank and he thought of something. "Pay close attention to the whereabouts of Su Huanli and others. If there is any special behavior, inform me immediately." Su Li's eyes flashed inexplicably. Wu Yun could even think of using Su Huanli's family to threaten the Yan family. Unfortunately, if she was really a hardworking and filial daughter, Wu Yun's plan had almost no weaknesses. But those were all illusions that she deliberately maintained. "It seems that I haven't given a class to the Qinghe girls' school for a long time. I haven't seen Hongxiu for many days. I will go to the girls' school first. You can handle the rest by yourselves." Su Li left these words and left lightly. Everyone looked at each other and didn't know what to do. Only Chu Qingning suddenly noticed something and asked blankly. Just now Su Li seemed to call her father Su Huanli, right? According to Miss Su Li's temperament, it's not appropriate to call that kind of person father, right? Fang Mu smiled and said. But Fang Yuan looked gloomy and confirmed some speculation in his heart. He was afraid that she didn't take the Su family seriously from the beginning. Everything was just her acting. Even in the Desu town, they were cheated. They thought that Su Li couldn't let go of her family, so she let Su Huanli bully her. Now it was quite ridiculous. How could a person like Su Li have feelings? Chapter 126. The next morning, Su Li came to the embroidery workshop. The chief steward was busy processing orders. When he saw Su Li, he was delighted. "Workshop owner, I haven't seen you for a long time. I've heard about it from Dean Wen. Did you have a good time?" "Thank you for your concern, Grandpa Jia. The scenery of the Qinghe River is good." Su Li replied with a faint smile. Then she brought up the business. "I come for the salary of the embroidery workshop." Jian understood and said with a smile, "Workshop owner Su, you are the workshop owner who doesn't care about her salary the most I have ever seen. It's already been 4 months, but you haven't mentioned anything about your salary. I thought you had completely forgotten about the salary." "Grandpa Jia, you must be joking." In fact, Su Li briefly talked about the matter of the Su family. Although her tone was light, Jian frowned. He didn't expect that the virtuous workshop owner Su had so many difficulties at home. "Workshop owner, if you need any help, just tell me. I will try my best to help you." He didn't want to see such a gentle and pleasant Su Li being bullied for no reason. There were rumors about Su Li's situation at home, but he didn't expect it to be true. "Thank you, Grandpa Jia. Let's talk about the salary." Su Li thanked him and mentioned the salary again. Jian immediately laughed and said, "Workshop owner Sue, you should know that every workshop owner has 10% of the profit. Do you know how much profit the embroidery workshop can make every month?" Well, Suli was speechless. She had never cared about the profit of the embroidery workshop, so she really didn't know. "Haha, I know you don't know." Jian laughed loudly and said, "After all, our embroidery workshop is appointed by the government. The monthly profit is more than 1 million taels. Workshop owner, you take 10%, which is 100,000 taels. It is 400,000 taels in 4 months. Suli couldn't help but be surprised. No wonder she didn't see Feng Qingru embroider several times in the previous life. She didn't worry about the expenditure at all. It turned out that the profit of the workshop owner was so terrible. 60% of the remaining 90% will be handed over to the government and the imperial court. The remaining 30% will be left to the embroidery workshop to develop freely. So, you don't need to worry about the embroidery workshop's operation. In fact, since the workshop owner's reputation spread, the business of our embroidery workshop is much more prosperous than before. Many businessmen come for you." Jian kept praising Suli. When he was about to continue, he saw Gao Dehai running from outside in a panic and said, "Miss Head Steward, boss, there's a family outside claiming to be the boss's family. They're clamoring to enter the back hall." Jia's face changed. "Speak of the devil." He turned his head and glanced at Suli, who was worried and scared. He couldn't help but have a strong desire to protect her. He said to Gao Dehai in a deep voice, "Invite them to the central hall." "Boss, why don't you hide at the back and rest first? Let's see how I deal with them." Suli nodded slightly. Wu Yun must be watching her every move in the dark. Now, the less contact she had with Su Huanli, the less flaws she would expose. To be honest, every time she had to bear the killing intent in her heart and pretend to be well-behaved in front of the Su family, she would be tired of it. Since Jian was around this time, she could take a break. After a short while, Su Huanli and his entourage came to the central hall aggressively. Seeing Jian, who was dressed meticulously in the central hall, Su Huanli immediately restrained his momentum. He nodded slightly and said arrogantly, "Let's go. I am the workshop owner of this embroidery workshop, Su Li's father, Su Huanli. How should I address you?" His words were full of contempt for Jian. Since Jian worked in the embroidery workshop, he must be Su Li's subordinate. Su Li was just his second daughter. It was obvious who was superior. Jian snorted coldly and said calmly, "I am Jian, the manager of the embroidery workshop. I've been working in the embroidery workshop ever since the previous workshop owner took office. Squire Su, you don't have to use workshop owner Su to pressure me. I don't buy it." When Su Huanli and others heard the words, their faces changed. It seemed that they met a tough one. He didn't know if that madam's words still counted. "Steward Jia, you are also a veteran of the embroidery workshop. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." "Ma'am." Su Chui stood out and rolled her turbid eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. "Old madam, please say it." "Ma'am." Su Chui was older than Jian, but Jian still maintained the basic etiquette and softened his attitude a little. "Ma'am." Su Chui secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Su Li is the daughter of the Su family. Although she is successful now, she still can't change the fact that she is a member of the Su family. I heard that she is busy with classes and has no time to come to the embroidery workshop to receive her salary. Let me claim it for her." Jia An's eyes widened. He finally knew how shameless the Su family was. They even said that they took the salary of their granddaughter in such a righteous way. "Old madam, I can't promise you. The embroidery workshop has its own rules. Although you are the grandmother of the workshop owner, you can't overstep your authority and take the salary of the workshop owner. Jian immediately refused. Ma'am. Su Chui sneered and said, well. Huanli, go to the school and ask Li to come here. Isn't her stuff the property of the Su family? Now she is a lecturer in the school. She is so arrogant that she even looks down on her family. She is really a good daughter of the Su family. Hearing ma'am. Su Chui's sarcasm, Jian was angry. Ma'am. Su Chui didn't treat the workshop owner as a person at all. What did she treat the workshop owner as? A money-making tool of the Su family. But he couldn't let Su Huanli leave. Otherwise, the news that Su Li was here would be exposed. Lord Su, wait. Jian immediately stopped Su Huanli, who was about to leave, and said, the workshop owner is busy with classes. How can she be disturbed? What you said is reasonable. Let me claim the salary of the workshop owner on behalf of the workshop owner. Hearing Jia An's words, ma'am. Su Chui and others were all happy. They didn't expect that Su Li hid money in the embroidery workshop. What the madam said was right. May I ask, old madam, how much do you want? Jian took out an account book and asked with an inquiring look. Of course, how much do you want? Su Huanli couldn't help but stand out and said excitedly. He wanted to buy a land to build a branch of the Byway building with Su Li's salary. If he didn't take all of it, it wouldn't be enough. All? Jian was so angry that he wanted to throw the writing brush on the ground. He thought that the Su family still had a little conscience and would leave some for Su Li. But he didn't expect that Su Huanli, as Su Li's father, would ask for all of it. Su Li paid for the room in the Fulai Inn yesterday. She only had 1 tael of silver left. How could these bastards not leave any chance for the workshop owner? If so, don't blame me. Jian sneered in his heart, but he nodded his head calmly and said, the workshop owner's monthly salary is 1,000 taels. 4 months will be 4,000 taels. Old madam, do you want banknotes or cash? Ma'am. Su Chui's smile suddenly froze. She couldn't help but blurt out, only 4,000 taels. So little. Jian raised his eyebrows and said, old madam, how much do you think? The workshop owner is just an idle job. You don't need to do anything at ordinary times. Are you not satisfied with 1,000 taels per month? There is no such good thing in the world. Hearing Jia An's words seemed to be true, ma'am. Su Chui's face darkened. It shouldn't be. The madam clearly said that there were at least hundreds of thousands of taels to be taken. They didn't think it was possible, but they still hoped to get tens of thousands of taels. However, they didn't expect that there were only 4,000 taels, which was much lower than their expectation. For a moment, everyone in the Su family looked pale. Jian laughed in his heart, but he said impatiently, old madam. Do you still want the 4,000 taels? If not, I will leave. There are many things to do in the embroidery workshop. I have no time to delay. Yes, yes, yes. Ma'am. Su Chui responded and nodded repeatedly. It would be a waste not to take the silver. How could she not take it? The bank notes of Wantong Money House, old madam. I have something else to do, so I can't accompany you. After putting away the account book, Jian shook his head and left. Su Huanli wanted to ask about other things about Su Li, but he didn't see Jian. Forget it. I didn't expect that the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop didn't have much profit. Area is useless, ma'am. Su Chui held the bank notes and turned her eyes to her son. Son, how much silver did you bring? 50,000 taels. Su Huanli took out a lot of bank notes and said, it is enough for us to buy a good land and open a branch shop. I don't know whether Lee is willing to continue, dare she not? Ma'am. Su Chui stared at her son and said, she is a great sinner of our Su family. Even if she opens 10,000 byway buildings, she can't atone for the crime of killing my grandson. Son, when you are soft-hearted, you might as well think of Xiaoyan, who was killed by Arya before he was born. Yes, I know. Zhu Yan, who was pregnant, smiled brightly when she heard Ma'am Su Chui's words. In more than a month, her son would come to this world. At that time, it was almost the time when she personally buried Su Li. Madame Wu Yun was really her benefactor. After the Su family left, Jian, who had been observing in the dark, came out from the yard next to Su Li and said with a smile, workshop owner, they all left. Come out. Su Li came out from the back room with red eyes. She bowed to Jian and said, thank you, Grandpa Jia. Hey. You can't do that. Jian stopped Su Li quickly and said, I just couldn't stand it and did what I should do. How can you give the 400,000 taels of silver to such unscrupulous parents? It's better to let me save it for you. After you leave the Su family, you can open a shop in the Qinghe town. Su Li nodded gently and smiled through tears. She said, when the eldest brother comes back, everything will be fine. Jia nodded with a smile. But he was curious who the eldest brother was. It was a miracle that Su Li came from such a bad family. Was there another outstanding genius? Su Li didn't withdraw a penny. Since she was going to act, she had to do it. She didn't do anything in the afternoon. She just went to the Fulai Inn and told Wang Fulai that the money of the embroidery workshop was taken away by her family. She couldn't take out 1,000 taels for the time being. Wang Fulai had to wait for her next salary. Wang Fulai was furious, but in the end, he just let out a long sigh. Lecturer Su, if you have a chance to leave the family in the future, you'd better leave and develop yourself. When you ascend to a higher position in the future, I'm afraid that the Su family will cause you a lot of trouble. Thank you for reminding me. Su Li nodded and left. Wang Fulai looked at her back and shook his head. He was afraid that the girl didn't listen to him. Another day passed. In the night wind, Fang Yuan came to the attic of the Linli building. He couldn't help but sigh when he saw the graceful figure sitting on the windowsill and drinking. Are you going to be entangled with the Su family? Su Li turned her head and smiled with a trace of obsession. She said, entangled. No. I'm not entangled. I haven't played enough. They owe me and haven't paid me off. How can I let them go so easily? They owe me too much, too much. She was almost talking in her sleep in the end. Fang Yuan hesitated for a moment. When he approached, he saw that the girl sitting by the window was drunk. He picked her up and put her on the soft bed. Then he murmured in the wind. Chapter 127. Su Huanli took the 4,000 taels of silver from Su Li and the 50,000 taels he brought with him. Finally, he bought a good piece of land on the street of the Linli building, which was diagonally opposite the Linli building. It was worth mentioning that the street with few people gradually had the potential to become a first-class street in the city because of the driving effect of the Linli building. Therefore, the rent had increased. If it was 4 months ago, the price of the shop that Su Huanli bought now was only 20,000 taels of silver. Fortunately, this shop used to be a restaurant. Although it is a little old, it can still be used. When there is income here, I will renovate it. Su Huanli looked at the newly bought empty land and couldn't help but feel distressed. If he had known that the price would rise, he would have bought it earlier. It was Su Li's fault that she didn't tell him. Walking to the second floor, Su Huanli turned over the wooden window with disgust. Then he saw the long line outside the Leanly building diagonally opposite. He immediately had mixed feelings. It was said that the Leanly building had become the most profitable winery in the Qinghe town. 4 months ago, the Leanly building belonged to the Su family and there was nothing there. In just less than half a year, tut-tut. He deserves to be the master of a big family. I can't compare with him, Su Huanli sighed. At his level, he naturally couldn't get in touch with the boss of the Leanly building. Although he had heard of Ms. Li, people would first think of a man instead of a woman when it was mentioned. It was impossible to think of Su Li. Even for Yan Shixuan, when he heard the name Mr. Li for the first time, and then he heard the mysterious cultivation, he first thought of Child Li, the hierarch of the Yinma cult in Jianghu. After seeing that Ms. Li was a woman, Yan Shixuan overturned his previous speculation. Although no one in Jianghu knew the true face of Child Li, they all knew that the hierarch was a man, and it was difficult to distinguish good and evil. He was not as kind and easy to get along with as Ms. Li. Zipei, your mother's delivery day is coming. Don't be busy with the new shop recently. Spend more time with your mother. Your father and I will take care of it. There will be no problem. Looking at Su Zipei, who was busy, ma'am. Su Chui quickly stopped her and said with love in her eyes, I will ask Arya to clean up later. I heard that the school also assigned 2 manservants to her. It won't violate the rules if I ask the 2 manservants to help, right? Grandma is right. Second sister didn't even come back for the new year. It's obvious that she doesn't take us seriously. We should teach her a lesson. Su Zipei said, which made Ma'am Su Chui feel so comfortable that the wrinkles on her face were stretched with a smile. When Su Huanli's family was busy with the new store, they didn't know that their every move was noticed by many people. Not to mention the Leanly building and Wu Yun, even the Yan family also paid attention to it. Su Huanli's family came suddenly and targeted Su Li in every way. I'm afraid that someone is making things difficult for her. Yan Shixuan was not weak. He could naturally perceive what Su Li could think of. When he received the latest news from his subordinates, he could not help but frown slightly. He sighed slightly and sat down to pinch the space between his eyebrows. His upright face was filled with exhaustion. It was really tiring to plot against the Jin family and the Lin family in the past half-month. Dad, I found it out. The old butler of the Su family who didn't come with us in the Desu town said that someone did go to the Su family to tip off the lecturer Su Li. Yan Zai came in a hurry, and his words immediately refreshed Yan Shixuan. Sure enough. It's strange. The old butler of the Su family can speak for Su Li. It seems that the Su family doesn't just want to bully the little girl. However, even so, the little girl of the Su family is still in a bad situation. Yan Zai muttered to himself. He remembered that Ning Yunji told him that Su Li was supported by Qi Xianqing. Based on this, he must not let Su Li have an accident in the Qinghe town. Otherwise, if that person got angry, not only the Yan family, but also the entire Dehan country would be shaken. Zai, you are responsible for Su Li's safety. Try not to let her get involved in this dispute. If the Su family has any signs, you must eliminate them as soon as possible. Do you understand? Yan Zai heard his father's serious tone, but he looked serious and nodded heavily. Thinking of the appearance of Su Li, who was seriously injured and stained with blood, he couldn't bear to see such a pure, flawless, weak and strong girl being plotted against by the Jin family and the Lin family. In the courtyard of the Qinghe girls' school, Su Li took the latest information from Fang Yuan and smiled slightly. It was really a coincidence that Su Huanli bought the branch of the Baiwei building diagonally opposite to the Leanly building. There is no movement from Wu Yun, but the Yan family went to the Desu town and seemed to find something. Fang Yuan added some key points. Su Su Li nodded and pondered for a moment. Then she said, "Stay still for the time being and wait and see." For several days, Su Li gave this order. Fang Yuan was used to it. He nodded and left instantly. The room was quiet again. Su Li took the AO sword skills and turned to the third hurdle. Then she carefully felt it. She didn't go back to the Linli building these days. If she went back, she would definitely not be discovered by Wu Yun's people. But nothing was absolute. Su Li never felt that she was very lucky. Now it was a critical period, so she had to be careful. Su Li looked for a while and suddenly thought of something. She raised her head and said, "Mammy, is my mother going to give birth soon?" Mammy Li, who was dozing off in the sun outside the door, was suddenly awakened. She scratched her confused eyes and nodded immediately. She said, "Miss is right. The fifth master will be born in less than a month." The fifth master. Su Li tilted her head and smiled. Mammy Li was puzzled. She said, "Didn't the witch say that the first madam was pregnant with a young master?" "Mammy, ask someone to inquire about it secretly. See which midwife in the city will deliver my mother. Then I can know whether my mother will give birth to the fifth brother or the fifth sister." "Ah. I'm going." Mammy Li stood up and sighed. The miss said that she didn't care, but she still cared about the first madam. Alas, the first madam was an inhuman woman. How many virtues did she accumulate in the previous life to give birth to such an excellent and kind miss? Perhaps both sides couldn't afford to make trouble, so the Qinghe town temporarily returned to peace. Only the newly opened Baiwei building opposite the Linli building became a hot topic recently. I heard that the restaurant opposite the Linli building is very good. Have you all been there? I have been there. I thought it was all bragging. But it turns out that some dishes are really delicious. You don't understand. I heard about it through my connections. Those recipes were developed by Miss Su Li, the most talented woman in the Qinghe town. It would be strange if they are not delicious. I see. Is it the 16-year-old lecturer Su? Hearing what you said, I want to see whether lecturer Su lives up to her reputation. Ho ho, you don't need to doubt the talent of the Mississippi. She is the youngest special class lecturer in the Qinghe girls' school. Even the first master of the Lin family doesn't deserve her. I heard that lecturer Su Li is very beautiful. She is really talented and good-looking. The remarks gradually spread, and the business of the Baiwei building was booming. Su Huanli was overjoyed. He felt that it was right for him to pluck up the courage to come to the Qinghe town. The boiler of the restaurant was naturally designed by Su Li, and then he called some helpers from the Desu town. Then, the restaurant completely entered the normal operation. Although the profit was not much because of the old house, Su Huanli was full of confidence in the future. When he made enough money to renovate the restaurant, it would be the time for the new Baiwei building to turn over. With the fame of Su Li, maybe the profit of the new Baiwei building could catch up with that of the Linli building diagonally opposite. In order to celebrate the profit of the new restaurant, Su Huanli was generous. He sent invitations to all the big families in the Qinghe town in the name of Su Li and held a small banquet in the new Baiwei building. All the families received Su Huanli's invitations and had different reactions. In normal times, they certainly wouldn't care about such a small figure as Su Huanli. But at a sensitive time, they had already known the origin of the new Baiwei building. What's more, Su Huanli invited Su Li in the name of Su Li. From the beginning when Su Li entered the Qinghe town, she was marked as being injured by the Yan family. Later, whether she was seriously injured or was rescued, it proved that she belonged to the faction of satrap Yan. However, Su Huanli didn't know what was good for him and even invited the Jin and Lin families. It was hard not to think deeply about the meaning of it. Of course, we will go. Otherwise, people will think that the Jean and Lin families are afraid of the Yen family. But we can't let the head of the family go. Su Li is just a junior. It is suitable for the first master and the first miss to go there. I agree. I also agree. Satrap Yen received the invitation and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The Su family was really good at making trouble for him. But it was also a good opportunity to test the Jean and Lin families. Zai, you go with Hongxiu. Don't lose the face of the Yen family. I understand. In the process of all the families making arrangements, time passed slowly. Finally, the next evening came, and the banquet of the Baiwei building began. In front of the shabby restaurant, luxury carriages stopped one after another. All the people coming out of the carriages were splendid childs and misses of aristocratic families in brocade clothes. The passers-by who came to watch were all amazed. So many aristocratic families have been invited. It seems that the power of Miss Su Li is greater than imagined. The Linli building has risen fast enough. I didn't expect that the Baiwei building, which is even faster, came. It's really rare. No. I have to try whether I can sneak in or not. If I can go in and have a look, it's worthwhile to be a ghost. The passers-by were noisy, and the scene became a little chaotic. Fortunately, there were officers and soldiers guarding around the restaurant, so there was not too much trouble. Su Huanli guarded in front of the door and welcomed childs and misses of aristocratic families one after another. He was so happy. He didn't expect that the name of Su Li was so useful. So many people came to support. It could be imagined that the business of the Baiwei building would be better tomorrow. Su Li stood beside him with a gentle smile. It seemed that she was not angry that Su Huanli sent invitations in her name without authorization. Stop. Stop. But at this time, two luxury carriages stopped at the door of the restaurant at the same time. A man and a woman walked out of the carriages. When they saw each other, the air seemed to be stagnant. When others saw this scene, they also froze and fell into a ghostly silence. The people who came were the brother and sister of the Yen family, Yen Zai and Yen Hongxiu, and the first master and miss of the Jean family and the Lin family, Lin Yanqing and Jean Rulan. The two sides had been fighting openly and secretly for more than a month, and they had never met each other. At this moment, they suddenly saw each other. Of course, they were sharp with each other and didn't give in to each other. Although Su Huanli saw a little clue, he just arrived in the Qinghe town. How could he understand the relationship between the two sides? He immediately greeted them and smiled flatteringly. Aren't you the son and daughter of the satrap? I'm Su Huanli. Greetings to you. Invite them in quickly. Chapter 128. Jean Rulan's voice was not low. Almost all the onlookers around heard it. The smile on Su Huanli's face froze instantly, and his face turned red. He just came to flatter as usual. How could he get into trouble? He had no hatred with the Jean family and the Lin family. Thinking of the power of the Jean family and the Lin family, Su Huanli was full of anger, but he still turned his head with a forced smile and flattered. It turns out that you are the first child Lin and Miss Jean. You are really a perfect couple. Others envy you so much. Jean Rulan was happy and her eyes brightened. She knew that she didn't deserve such an excellent man as Lin Yanqing. Without the help of her family, she couldn't marry Lin Yanqing in this life. Now she was praised by Su Huanli, so she felt comfortable. But Su Huanli turned around and flattered Lin Yanqing and his wife like a fence-sitter, but he didn't see the disgust in the eyes of the siblings of the Yen family. As expected, Su Li's family was as unbearable as the rumor said. Lin Yanqing felt disgusted as if he had eaten a fly when Su Huanli said that he and Jean Rulan were a match. He couldn't help but snort. It turns out that Boss Su is a coward. It's lecturer Su's misfortune to have such a father like you. Then Lin Yanqing shook off Jean Rulan's hand that held his sleeve. He turned around and looked at Su Li for a moment. Then he entered the building alone. Su Huanli was dumbfounded. It was the first time for him to flatter others and be scolded. What kind of world was this? He, brother, let's go in too. Yan Hongxiu pulled Yan Zai and ignored Jean Rulan, who was also dumbfounded and lost. She winked at Su Li naughtily and then entered the building together. Su Li inadvertently glanced at the long bow wrapped in cloth on Yan Hongxiu's back. Then she turned her eyes away. The girl's method of blood refining was about to be completed. 49 days. Time passed so fast. After a while, several misses and childs came. The small banquet of the Baiwei building became the gathering place of the young talents in the Qinghe town with the help of various people. Although Su Huanli felt strange, he was not qualified to be picky because of his identity. He immediately ordered people to prepare hot dishes for the banquet. Lin Yanqing was sitting in the room, drinking by himself. His face was cold. Since he married the daughter of the Jin family, no one came to talk to him for a while. From time to time, he would turn his head and look at Su Li, who was still greeting guests at the door, with hidden possessiveness in his eyes. He never had the habit of giving up the woman he liked. From the beginning to the end, Jean Rulan was just an object for the family's interests. He had no interest in such a superficial woman. In the entire Qinghe town, only Su Li could make him have a great desire. Young Master Lin is a newlywed, yet he chose to drink alone here. How puzzling. At this moment, a mocking voice sounded in his ears. Lin Yanqing withdrew his gaze and looked at Yan Zai, who was sitting next to him. He said coldly, "Yan Zai, if you can climb to the top 10 of the College of Martial Arts, I will still pay attention to you. Now, do you think you have the right to speak to me on equal footing?" Yan Zai did grow up. If he heard this kind of words in the past, he would be so angry that his face would turn red. But now, his reaction was very calm. He said, "Whether I have the right or not, it is not up to you, Lin Yanqing. Although Su Huanli of the Baiwei building has poor taste, the wine is the Liehua of the Linli building. Young Master Lin, you have a big appetite. Aren't you afraid of being drunk here?" Lin Yanqing's expression changed slightly. He looked at Yan Zai more seriously and said, "I didn't expect that the son of Satrap Yan is not as bad as I thought. You flatter me, you flatter me. Rumors can never be trusted." Yan Zai smiled slightly and reached out with hands folded, just like I didn't expect that young Master Lin would compromise for a small profit and marry a woman like Jean Rulan. I am really puzzled. Blue veins appeared on Lin Yanqing's forehead. Yan Zai's words suddenly poked his sore spot. He couldn't help but refute, joke. I wouldn't be such a short-sighted person if it weren't for. Lin Yanqing suddenly realized that Yan Zai was trying to get information out of him. He was almost tricked. Lin Yanqing's back was covered with a layer of cold sweat, and he immediately shut up. However, Yan Zai laughed lightly. His smile was abnormally deep. If it's not something, can Big Brother Lin dispel this little brother's doubts? Lin Yanqing squeezed the wine cup in his hand. He had calmed down at this moment. Naturally, he wouldn't fall into Yan Zai's trap. Yan Zai, I admit that you don't have the talent in martial arts. But your ability to deceive people is getting better under the guidance of your father. Even I was almost tricked. Unfortunately, I was still not good enough. Then, Lin Yanqing was no longer gentle and elegant. A touch of coldness flashed across his face. When the Qinghe town completely falls into my hands, let me tell you what it is. What do you think, child Yen? Yen Zai's eyes also flashed a sense of danger. He said, it seems that child Lin is very confident. Then I will wait and see. At the small banquet, Lin Yanqing left in advance with the excuse that he was not feeling well. Yan Hongshou wanted to chat with Su Li, but Yen Zai was in a hurry to leave. So, she had to leave with her brother. The banquet came to an end before it reached the climax, which was really anticlimactic. However, Su Huanli was still very happy and looked forward to the arrival of tomorrow. Su Li returned to the school after dealing with the kitchen affairs. Although the banquet was noisy, she still heard every word of the conversation between Lin Yanqing and Yen Zai. Although she didn't know what the Jin family and the Lin family would do later, she finally decided the fact that there were others standing behind them. I haven't seen him for 3 days, and I should look at him with new eyes. Yen Zai's temperament has improved recently. In this way, it will not be difficult for me to fulfill the second agreement with him. Under the moonlight, the woods on the mountain behind the courtyard rustled in the night wind. It was true that aptitude was everything in the martial arts circle, but there was always a way out. There was also a kind of peerless xiangong that was only suitable for people with ordinary aptitude to practice. Su Huanli was busy with the restaurant affairs, and Su Li was also called to help. She had no time to spare. At the same time, in the inn where Zhu Yan lived, Ma'am. Su Chui walked back and forth in front of the door with a crutch. Su Zipei also stared at the door of the room anxiously. She only heard screams coming from the door, but she couldn't hear the cry of the baby. How long has it been? Why hasn't the baby been born yet? Ma'am. Su Chui was so anxious that her forehead was sweating. She obviously hired the best midwife in the city, and Zhu Yan was pregnant for the 3rd time. How could there be an accident? But after a whole day, Zhu Yan's voice was hoarse, and she didn't give birth to her grandson. Grandma, don't worry. I will go in and have a look. Su Zipei was anxious to open the door, but at this time, a loud and powerful cry of the baby finally came. Ma'am. Su Chui and Su Zipei looked at each other and were overjoyed. Then they both opened the door and went in. The tired midwife held the baby. When she saw Ma'am Su Chui, she immediately greeted them, but she didn't look good. Ma'am. Su Chui suddenly felt nervous. She wrapped the baby in the midwife's arms. When she opened the baby, her face immediately became gloomy. A girl. A girl again. Including Su Li, Zhu Yan gave birth to the 3rd daughter. Didn't the witch say that it was a boy? What on earth went wrong? Su Zipei's face was also pale. Of course, she knew that the witch's words were false. Those were all lies bought by her mother with money. But now the baby was born. How could she cover up the lie? It must be the witch who lied. No, I have to ask her. Ma'am. Su Chui threw the baby to Su Zipei. Then she didn't look at Zhu Yan, who was lying on the bed and couldn't open her eyes. She went back to the Daisu town to find the witch alone. The midwife stood aside and didn't know whether to go or not. Finally, someone came to call her. She took the silver and left dejectedly. If she gave birth to a daughter for a big family, as a midwife, she would also suffer. She didn't even get a red packet. Zipei, where is your brother? Bring it to me. At this time, Zhu Yan finally woke up. Seeing Su Zipei holding the baby in a daze, she immediately said. Su Zipei walked over slowly. She felt sad and threw the swaddle to Zhu Yan. She cried, Mother, it is the 5th sister, not the 5th brother. Mother, Didn't you say that it must be the fifth brother this time? Why is it a loser again? What? Zhu Yan's pupils shrank. Regardless of the severe pain in her lower body, she climbed up and untied the swaddle with trembling hands. When she saw the fifth daughter's lower body was bare, she instantly lost all her strength and collapsed on the bed. How could it be? She had obviously eaten so many folk prescriptions, but she still couldn't compare with Li Yulian, the bitch. By the way, mother, Grandma has gone back to find the witch. What if the witch betrays us? Su Zipei suddenly panicked. Zhu Yan slowly opened her eyes. Her slightly swollen eyes were terrifyingly calm. She said, "Don't worry. The witch won't reveal the secret. Since God doesn't give me a way to live, why should I ask for more?" Mother. What are you talking about? Su Zipei felt that something was wrong. She grasped Zhu Yan's hands tightly and said, "Mother, you still have me. Don't think about doing stupid things." Zhu Yan smiled, which made Su Zipei's back numb. She was horrified. Even the fifth sister, who had not yet been named in the swaddle, was scared and cried loudly. How could I do stupid things? I just felt that I was too soft-hearted before. Your grandma and father loved me so much, so I didn't do it. As soon as the fifth daughter was born, ma'am. Su Chui immediately ran back to the Desu town. Su Huanli didn't even come to see her. In this case, Wu Yun's proposal. Why should she hesitate? Zipei, I have a very important thing for you to do. You must do it secretly. Even your father can't know it. Do you know? Zhu Yan suddenly said in a calm and cautious tone. Chapter 129. When Ma'am Su Chui returned to the Desu town, she immediately ordered the Su family to find the whereabouts of the witch. But the news surprised Ma'am. What? The witch is dead. Li Yin stood in front of Ma'am. Ma'am. Su Chui bowed and nodded slowly, yes. It is said that she died suddenly. Many people said that the witch said something she shouldn't say and was punished by the gods. Punished by the gods, ma'am. Su Chui murmured, and then she looked crazy. It's good to be punished by the gods. My Su family's fine grandson is gone because of her words. My poor fifth grandson, boo-hoo. Ma'am. Su Chui covered her face and cried bitterly. Li Yin didn't know what to do, but he also understood that the third child of the first madam was not so good. Mammy Li, who got the news from the midwife, was the last one to know the result. When she heard that the fifth child of the Su family was a daughter, she couldn't help but feel happy. She thought that the first madam deserved it. Then she told the news to Su Li, who just returned to the courtyard. Fifth sister, I know. Wet nurse, quickly go and cook. I've been busy the whole day and I'm about to die, Su Li responded calmly. Mammy Li sighed that the miss had a higher realm. Then she went back to the kitchen. Su Li took a bath and changed clothes as usual. She washed away the smell of smoke in the Baiwei building. Then she sat quietly to adjust her breath and consolidate her cultivation. She was not surprised that Zhu Yan gave birth to a daughter again. In the previous life, Zhu Yan also gave birth to the fourth and fifth children. They were all daughters. Every time when the news of Zhu Yan's pregnancy came out, ma'am. Su Chui would go down the mountain from the temple and accompany Zhu Yan for a year. Then she returned disappointed. When Zhu Yan gave birth to the sixth child, ma'am. Su Chui didn't bother to go down the mountain. She had seen that Zhu Yan didn't have a son at all. However, Zhu Yan's sixth child was indeed a son. Unfortunately, he was poisoned by Li Yulian, who was eager to avenge Su Qinghao. He didn't even have the chance to open his eyes and see the world. He was reincarnated to meet the king of hell. At that time, if Ma'am Suchui was around, Li Yulian would not have succeeded easily. After Ma'am Suchui got the news, she was so angry that she vomited blood and died directly. Su Li remembered all kinds of memories of the previous life very clearly. She knew that Ma'am Suchui actually didn't like Xu Yan. Li Yulian was Li Yulian's second wife. What she wanted was that Xu Yan could give birth to a legitimate first grandchild. But it was ridiculous that Ma'am Suchui didn't like Xu Yan until she died. The next morning, Su Li came to the Baiwei building. Su Zipei, who had lost a lot of weight, suddenly came to her with an infant in her arms. "Third sister, what are you doing?" Su Li looked confused, but she had a guess in her heart. Su Zipei snorted and impatiently put the swaddle into Su Li's hands. "This is fifth sister. You take care of her." "Me?" Su Li said in surprise. "Shouldn't I take care of you?" "How can I take care of them?" "There are." "What else?" "You are so annoying." "This is mother's order. You don't have to come here in the future. They don't make precious beggar's chicken here. I can handle it." Su Zipei put her hands on her hips and snorted. Mother said, "If there is no milk, look for a wet nurse or rice soup." You are also like this. I am tired now, and I have no time to feed this useless thing. Su Li looked down at the infant in the swaddle who was just born a few days ago and full of curiosity about the world. There was a trace of undetectable tenderness in her eyes. In the previous life, although fifth sister was not favored by her family, she was Xu Yan's biological daughter. She lived a comfortable life and often stole food from the kitchen for Su Li to eat. I see. Su Li nodded. At this time, Su Huanli saw the two sisters and the infant in Su Li's arms. A trace of impatience flashed in his eyes and he scolded, "Why are you standing here? Isn't the restaurant busy enough? Go out and help." Su Zipei shrank her neck and heard a cry. It turned out that fifth sister was scared by Su Huanli and began to cry. Again. Crying all day long. So annoying. In the past 2 days, she took care of her mother and fifth sister. Her mother was easy to deal with, but fifth sister often cried. It was useless to persuade her. If she was not afraid of going to jail, she would strangle fifth sister directly. Su Huanli was also upset for a while. He quickly waved his hand to Su Li. "You go back first today and let the mammy take care of the baby. The business of the restaurant will be bad if she is kept here." Su Li pursed her lips and said, "Father, you haven't named fifth sister yet." "Name?" Su Huanli seemed to have just got up, and then he waved his hand and impatiently dismissed, "Li, you name her." "I don't have the time." Then the infant in the swaddle cried louder. Su Huanli immediately pushed Su Li out of the back door and said, "Get out of here." Annoying. Su Li's eyes were cold. Her eyes were like a blade cutting through the air. Su Huanli instantly felt cold all over his body, as if he was stared at by a prehistoric beast. But this feeling only lasted for a moment and disappeared. Seeing Su Li go away with the baby, Su Huanli touched his head and said to himself, "I'm too tired these days. It seems that I have to have a good rest." In the courtyard of the school, Mammy Li was shocked when she saw Su Li came back in the daytime with a baby in her arms. "It's fifth sister." Su Li carefully placed the baby on the bed and then whispered, "Mammy, find a wet nurse for fifth sister. This little guy has been drinking rice soup all the time. I'm afraid that he is hungry." "Ah. I'm going now." Mammy Li felt sad. Miss was in the same situation in those days. If she didn't have a baby who died early, Suli would have been drinking rice soup all the time. Suli leaned over the bed and looked at the quiet sleeping face of the little girl on the bed. No one knew what she dreamed of, but she smiled innocently. In the previous life, your name was Su Linan. In this life, you don't need to choose such a meaningless name. You should have your free life. You are Su Yuxing. Suli chuckled and scratched Su Yuxing's smooth face. Although the fifth sister was born by Zhu Yan and was the flesh and blood of the Su family, Suli didn't hate it. Instead, she felt that it was a chance for her to make up for her regret. In the previous life, she watched the fifth sister fall into the abyss of endless desire under the indoctrination of Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. In this life, she could at least change this and make the fifth sister's childhood more bright. There were few things that couldn't be bought with money in the Qinghe town. Soon Mammy Li came back with a wet nurse. When the wet nurse saw Suli, she was shocked at first. Later, she knew that the baby was Suli's younger sister, not an illegitimate daughter. Then she also saw that Suli was still a virgin. She was relieved immediately. She was the first talented girl in the Qinghe town. It was a big scandal that she secretly gave birth in the school. After arranging the affairs of the fifth sister, it was dark. Suli went upstairs after dinner. Suddenly, a black shadow flashed by the window. There was one more person in the room. It was Fang Yuan. Suli frowned and said, "It's just after 5 o'clock now. You came 3 hours earlier. What happened?" Fang Yuan looked dignified and said quickly, "Just now, a group of men in black attacked the satrap's mansion. Most of the official silver was stolen. A large number of embroidery materials that were supposed to be handed over to the imperial court were also burned. The Yen mansion is in a mess." Su Li's pupils contracted violently and she said, "Finally, you can't help it." "No, it's not Wu Yun." Fang Yuan looked more serious and said, "Wu Yun didn't move at all, so we didn't notice it. We couldn't help satrap Yen." Su Li took a deep breath and sat down. She said slowly, "Yen Shixuan's cultivation is at the peak of the acquired realm. If he tried his best to stop them, he could kill 1 or 2 of them. How could he let them succeed? I don't know. Satrap Yen is also anxious. Now he is thoroughly investigating the Qinghe town. The official silver can't be transported out of the town quietly. We also suspect that the thieves have a foothold in the town." While talking, Suli had changed into the Mr. Li costume that she hadn't used for a long time. She said, "It's urgent. I will go with you. If the Yen family is defeated, the Linli building will be in trouble." She bet on the Yen family. If the Yen family was blamed by the imperial court for incompetence, it was very likely to lose its position. At that time, no matter which family of the Jin family or the Lin family became the satrap, they would have a way to deal with the Linli building. The inborn senior was powerful, but in front of the giant Dahan country, it was too small. Speaking of it, it's because Yen Shixuan is too weak. While running, Su Li's eyes flashed. It could be said that the Qinghe province was the weakest among the 20 provinces of the Dahan country. In the other 19 provinces, the satrap himself had the inborn cultivation. One of them dominated the main city, and others didn't dare to act rashly. Or, there was a senior of the inborn realm in the family. Even if the family couldn't dominate, it could suppress other families. No one was like Yen Shixuan. He didn't reach the inborn realm, and there were few people in the mansion. There was not even a person in the acquired 9th hurdle. Yen Shixuan only had the military power in his hand. But he couldn't use the military to deal with the Jin family who also had an official position. Otherwise, Jin Jintian would immediately charge him with the crime of using the military power without authorization, which was a serious crime of the imperial court. When Su Li came to the satrap's mansion, she saw Yan Shishuan was angry. Search. Search with all your strength. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find those thieves. Except for the necessary personnel to look after the rest of the official silver, all the people in the satrap's mansion were sent by Yan Shishuan to search for the whereabouts of the thieves, including Yan Hongxiu and Yan Zai. Yan Zai was about to go out with a group of people, but he ran into Su Li. He immediately said happily, "Father, Mr. Li is here." "Mr. Li, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you recently?" "Of course, the Linli building is good, but there seems to be some trouble in your mansion." Su Li smiled and her words were quite meaningful. Yan Shishuan braced himself to come over and sighed, "Mr. Li, I'm afraid that you will be disappointed this time." "Alas, satrap, you don't need to say more. The Linli building is here to help. If you need any help, please let me know." Yan Shishuan shook his head helplessly and said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Li. But I still don't understand how the thieves sneak into the mansion. Even I didn't notice it. Now it's just a blind cat catching a mouse. It's purely luck." Yan Zai listened to the conversation between the two and was full of doubts. It was obvious that they owed money to Mr. Li. Was there a secret relationship between his father and Mr. Li? Yan Zai suddenly remembered that half a month ago, the family suddenly cheered up the financial situation. He was shocked and looked at Su Li from the original reverence to a layer of gratitude. "Report." Suddenly, a soldier panted forward and said loudly, "Lord, we have found the whereabouts of the official silver. We found 50,000 taels of official silver in the Byway building on the Donger Street. The official seal is clear. It is the lost thing in the treasury." The Byway building. Yan Shishuan's face changed dramatically and he couldn't help being shocked. Then he said sternly, "Block the Byway building immediately. Don't let anyone escape. Arrest the people of the Byway building." Yan Shishuan paused and then said in a low voice, "Arrest them all. Leave no one alive." Fang Yuan stood behind Su Li. He obviously heard that Su Li's breath was slightly stagnant and then returned to normal. "Mr. Li, the official silver has been settled. Sorry, I can't stay here." "Excuse me." Su Li's face was covered with a veil, so people couldn't see the change of her expression. Her tone was still as usual, "It should be so. Since there is a result, the Linli building will not intervene. I'm leaving. Thank you for the help of the Linli building. I'm very grateful." After some polite greetings, Yan Shishuan immediately left with his people. Su Li and Fang Yuan returned to the Linli building. Standing in front of the window on the top floor, they clearly saw that the Byway building was crowded with soldiers. People were dragged away one after another. "Su Li, if you want to retaliate against the Su family, you don't have to do this." Fang Yuan organized his words and didn't know how to continue. Chapter 130. It's not you. Fang Yuan slightly opened his thin lips and was surprised. It was not that he was inconsiderate, but that Su Li's reaction was too indifferent when she heard the news. She was so indifferent that he suspected that the initiator was Su Li herself. "It's better to think about how to save the situation than to doubt me." Su Li looked at Su Huanli struggling to be dragged away by the officers and soldiers. She said coldly, "I don't have time to rebuild the Linli building in other counties." Fang Yuan watched Su Li leave. He frowned for a moment and then relaxed. Thinking about it carefully, Su Li couldn't be the murderer who stole the official silver. Otherwise, the good situation that the Linli building painstakingly created would be destroyed. He only saw the hatred between Su Li and the Su family, but ignored Su Li's code of conduct. Whether it was the agreement with the brother and sister of the Yen family or the 1,000,000 taels of silver lent to Yen Shushuan, it was enough to prove that Su Li favored and supported the Yen family. How could she destroy the chessboard and put the Yen family in danger? I was impulsive. Thinking of this, Feng Yuan was annoyed. He not only thought in the wrong direction, but also blamed Su Li impulsively. Now he felt that he was extremely stupid and didn't know what Su Li would think of him. Feng Yuan, why are you still here? The men in black have made new moves. Su Li has gone to the school. Chu Qingning came in and shouted hurriedly. Feng Yuan was like waking up from a dream. He immediately returned to normal and left with Chu Qingning in a hurry. When Su Li rushed back to the school, it was dawn. Soon, she received a message from Wen Ruomin. Wen Ruomin asked her to go to discuss something important. When Su Li went there, she found that Yen Shushuan was also there. Seeing that Su Li came over with a confused face, Wen Ruomin felt distressed. She didn't know what happened last night. Dean, why do you call me here so early? Su Li said with confusion. Then she turned around and seemed to see Yen Shushuan. She quickly saluted and said, I'm Su Li, Satrap Yen. Yen Shushuan nodded slightly and looked solemn. There was a trace of apology in his eyes. Su Li, you come at the right time. I have something to tell you. Wen Ruomin's expression was complicated. She held Su Li's hand and hesitated for a long time before telling her what happened last night. Satrap Yen knew that it wasn't your father who did it, but the Jin and Lin families were keeping a close eye on it. He had no choice but to bring your father back to prevent them from having any evidence against him. It could be considered as a covert protection for your father. Su Li's eyes were red. She bit her lips and nodded. Wen Ruomin was both gratified and distressed. Su Li was very sensible. But it was too cruel for her to be involved in the intrigues between adults at the age of 16. Look at this. This was delivered to the academy by the beggar today. I've already sent someone to investigate the origins of this note, but there's probably no result. When Ruomin picked up the note on the table and handed it to Su Li stared at it and a vague light flashed in her eyes. What was written on the note wasn't evil, if one looked at the surface. This was clearly a secret letter to be given to Su Li alone. It stated the time and place for Su Li to meet, how to distribute the official silver profits, and the prospects for a better future. If Su Li didn't stand here, she almost believed that she was with the thieves who stole the official silver. Wen Ruomin and Yen Shushuan were not fools. They figured out the contradiction quickly. If it was really a secret letter, how could it be delivered to the academy by a beggar? After discussing for a moment, they quickly came to a conclusion. The message on the note seemed to be written to Su Li, but it was actually written to them. It was a threatening letter to ask them to hand over Su Li. Dean, I have nothing to do with the people in the letter. Su Li breathed quickly and a trace of panic flashed in her eyes. It seemed that she was afraid that Yen Shushuan and Wen Ruomin didn't believe her. Wen Ruomin sighed and touched Su Li's soft hair. She said with a smile, silly girl, of course, we know that you have nothing to do with them. This letter actually asks us to hand you over. What? Su Li slightly opened her eyes, as if she didn't understand. Yen Shushuan frowned and stared at the crumpled note in Su Li's hand. Su Li came from the Desu town. She had a gentle and quiet temperament. Her personal social circle was also very narrow. It was impossible for her to become enemies with these thieves. The only possibility was that she was implicated by them. Lord Yen, I probably already know who is playing tricks behind the scenes. The light of wisdom flashed in Wen Ruomin's eyes. She said, Su Li, do you remember who you offended when you visited Dean Gong? Dean Gong. Su Li pretended to think, and then suddenly understood. She blurted out, "Is it Madame Gong?" But I just contradicted her a little. Does she have to do this? Madame Gong. Wu Yun. Yan Shixuan's expression changed. Finally, he was completely gloomy. If Wu Yun did have the means and ability to set up such a trap, it was hateful. Why didn't he think that she was behind the scenes? When Ruomin couldn't help but smile bitterly when she heard Su Li's naive words. She said, "Su Li, some people are narrow-minded, which can't be measured by ordinary people. Wu Yun is narrow-minded and will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Her plan was ruined by a senior. It is inevitable that she will vent her anger on others. Everyone likes to bully the weak. Among her enemies in the Qinghe town, you are the easiest one to bully." "I see." Su Li seemed to be suddenly enlightened, and then fell into deeper anxiety. She hurriedly said, "What should we do?" Workshop owner Su Yan Shixuan, who had been silent beside her, finally said, "For now, we can only ask you to go to this place to test it. I will send someone to follow and protect you in secret. If we see the note and don't respond, it is hard to guarantee that the other party will run away with the official silver. If I lose, I will take my wife and children back to my hometown. But the head of the Su family will be in danger. Under the pressure of the Jin family, I am afraid that I can only hand him over to the imperial court for punishment. Workshop owner Su, what do you think?" Su Li seemed to be struggling, and then she gritted her teeth and said, "I am willing to go. I believe that everything in the world has its own public opinion. I, Su Li, will take responsibility for what I have done. Madame Gong, just come to me. There is no need to embarrass my father." Yan Shixuan felt ashamed when he heard this. He had underestimated this young owner's courage. Although she was very afraid, she stood up without hesitation for a father who did not treat her as a human, and more importantly for the Yan family. She was young, but she could see everything clearly. Alas, girl, when Ruomin seemed to think of something in the past, and sadness flashed in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and said in a deep voice, "Girl, don't worry. Even if I lose my face, I will ask a senior to protect you in secret. You will definitely be safe." After the three people discussed the time and details, Yan Shixuan arranged soldiers to escort Su Li back to the courtyard, and then sent seriously ill people to protect her. After Su Li and Yan Shixuan left, Wen Ruomin sat for a moment, and then her turbid eyes became clearer. She took out another note from under the table. This note was found at her bedside in the morning, and she did not show it to anyone except herself. If Su Li does not come, the Yan family and the Qinghe girls' school will have a hard time. Wen Ruomin, you are still the same as 16 years ago. You can't protect her at all. Haha. Tear. Wen Ruomin tore the note into pieces with a sullen face. Then she glanced at the direction of Su Li's courtyard and said softly, "Guards, I want to go to the Linli building." The courtyard of the school was heavily protected by soldiers, so it naturally could not stop Su Li. It did not take Su Li much time to return to the Linli building. Wu Yun has a helper, and his means are good. Su Li put the note on the table calmly and said, "He can steal a large amount of official silver from the government office and burn the embroidery without being noticed. The first possibility is that this person's lightness skill is so high that he can ignore the protection of the warehouse of the government office and enter it. The second possibility is that the person is like you, Su Li, and he has mastered an extremely brilliant poison skill. The elite soldiers of the government office will be in a trance and be ignorant." Chu Qingning shook his head and said, but Feng Yuan retorted, "It is unlikely. With Yan Shixuan's sense of smell, he should be aware of the existence of the smoke. Of course, if it is the kind of black smoke refined by Su Li, it is another matter. Is there a third possibility?" Fong Mu obediently sat at the table and looked at the crowd. He raised his hand and said, "A mole." "No way." Yin Shuadong showed doubt and said, "That is an important place of the government office. The warehouse is guarded by the elite soldiers of the government office. They pledge their loyalty to the satrap's mansion. If there is a mole in this group of people, will there be any secrets in the satrap's mansion?" Looking at the heated discussion, Su Li smiled slightly and said, "Of course there is a mole. But it is not in the government office, but in the Byway building." Speaking of the Byway building, everyone's look changed. Fong Yuan reacted first and said in a cold tone, "You mean?" Su Li kept smiling and said slowly, "Only Su Huanli was arrested. Even my dear third sister happened to go back to the inn to take care of my mother. It is really a coincidence." Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. Chu Qingning was speechless and looked strange, but why did they do that? Didn't the first madam just give birth? What is the benefit for her to put Su Huanli in prison? Su Li didn't answer, but Yin Shuadong showed a thoughtful expression. It seemed that it was not very strange for Zhu Yan to do such a thing. But at this time, Haydn said outside the door, "Bosses, Dean Wen of the Qinghe Girls' School suddenly came to visit." "Wen Ruomin?" Su Li raised her eyebrows. "She just came back from the school." Could it be? After a while, in the reception hall of the back hall of the Linli building, Su Li dressed as Mr. Li and Wen Ruomin sat opposite each other. Yin Shuadong poured a cup of tea for Wen Ruomin respectfully and left with a smile. Wen Ruomin was quite flattered. In terms of status, the shopkeeper of the Linli building was almost the same as her, the dean. Yin Shuadong's service was too friendly. She felt strange, but Su Li's voice pulled her back from thinking to reality. "I haven't seen you for a long time. Dean Wen, you are still elegant. But why do you suddenly visit me?" Wen Ruomin looked ashamed. She stood up and bowed slightly. "I heard that Mr. Li has been practicing in silence. I shouldn't disturb you rashly. But, Mr. Li, can you let me tell you a story and then listen to my request?" Speaking of this, it is actually related to the little lecturer Su Li in my school. Su Li's eyes flashed, but she said with a smile, "In this case, Dean Wen, please tell me. I am all ears." Chapter 131. 18 years ago, a talented girl from a poor family was born in the Qinghe town. Her name was Su Yun. Su Yun's family had been poor farmers for 3 generations, but Su Yun's parents sold everything they had just to let her go to school. They thought that it would be the best result if she could only read a few words and marry a good family. Unexpectedly, Su Yun showed an extraordinary talent in literature. Soon, Wen Ruomin, who had just taken over as the dean of the girls' school, took a fancy to her and accepted her as a student. This kind of student relationship was not the general teacher-student relationship in the school. It was more like the close relationship between master and apprentice in the martial arts circle. Wen Ruomin treated Su Yun as her own daughter and taught her carefully. Su Yun didn't let Wen Ruomin down. At the age of 16, she successfully passed the preliminary examination and entered the Yunjing National College. 1 year later, she almost became a female official of the Dehan country. Su Yun's parents and Wen Ruomin were very happy. 1 year later, Su Yun's reputation as a talented woman spread all over Yunjing. Many young talents in Yunjing chased after her like crazy bees and butterflies. They all wanted to marry Su Yun. Although Wen Ruomin was worried that Su Yun didn't know people well, she believed that Su Yun could choose a good family to marry because of her intelligence. From then on, Su Yun became the madam of a rich and powerful family in Yunjing and one of the few female officials in the imperial court. But 2 years later, when she saw Su Yun escape back to the Qinghe town with blood all over her body and finally die in her arms, she was totally stunned. I don't know what she experienced in Yunjing in those 2 years and why she was chased. But when I remembered that I encouraged her to enter the official career and become a female official, I regretted it. Sometimes I think that if I didn't let her go to Yunjing that year, maybe she wouldn't die at the age of 18. And I didn't even know who her enemy was. Seeing when Ruomin burst into tears in front of her, Su Li's face under the veil didn't change at all. Only a flash of light flashed in her eyes from time to time. Su Yun also had the surname Su. It was fate. There were too many people with the surname Su in the world. Besides, the Qinghe province was a big province with the surname Su. 3 out of 10 people had the surname Su. It seemed that Su Yun had a tragic life. But Su Li had experienced so many tragedies in her previous life. When Ruomin's words couldn't arouse any emotion in her heart. However, Su Li comforted him on the surface, "This is fate. I think Miss Su Yun won't blame you in heaven. It's been so many years, so I'm sorry for your loss." When Ruomin wiped her tears and said embarrassedly, "Mr. Li, I'm sorry. This old lady has said so much, but actually, I want to say." The next words seemed to be a little difficult to say. When Ruomin hesitated for a while and finally said, "Su Li also encountered great danger. Satrap Yen said that Mr. Li's cultivation was profound. Even Satrap Yen felt inferior. Could you ask Mr. Li to protect the girls secretly?" When Ruomin begged and made a fist and palm salute. She said, "I think that Mr. Li doesn't like my family and background. If Mr. Li agrees to help me, I will be duty-bound to help you if you need any help in the future." A strange feeling rose in Su Li's heart. She couldn't figure out why when Ruomin begged so much for her. Even if it was to make up for the regret in her heart many years ago, she couldn't understand it. Because she would never have the emotion to make up for her regret in this lifetime. If she had a grudge, she would take revenge on the spot. "Dean Wen, although I'm very moved by your words," Su Li said with regret, "but something went wrong in my practice method recently. It's not suitable for me to help you. Otherwise, I will definitely help you in person." "Really?" When Ruomin looked disappointed. Su Li's tone was sincere, so she didn't doubt the truth. Otherwise, Mr. Li could refuse directly based on his superior identity. Why did he make up an inauspicious excuse? "However, I can send someone to protect Miss Su Li secretly. Although his cultivation is not as good as mine, he is also a good fighter. Even Satrap Yen can't fight with him for more than 10 moves. What do you think?" Su Li said again. When Ruomin's disappointment immediately turned into surprise. She said hurriedly, "That's really great. Mr. Li, you scared me to death when you didn't finish your words. I believe that Mr. Li won't beat around the bush because of your character. The thief and I will meet at the broken temple in the mountain outside the city at midnight tomorrow. I will go back and wait for the good news. Dean Wen, please." After seeing Wen Ruomin off, Su Li returned to the underground adytum. Fong Yuan and others immediately surrounded her. "You want us to protect you?" Chu Qingning felt strange. Was there a more strange request than this in the world? There must be a lot of people around the broken temple tomorrow. Don't take it lightly. Fong Yuan frowned and analyzed. Shuedong and Xiaomu's cultivation is still low, so they stay in the Linli building. Chu Qingning and I will go there. As for who will contact Satrap Yen. Chu Qingning and Fong Yuan looked at each other, and both of them were not sure. They had made good progress in cultivation recently, but they had not reached the peak of the acquired realm. If they met Satrap Yen, they were afraid that they would be easily exposed. Where is Luo Yichen? Su Li raised her eyebrows and said. In the martial arts field in the backyard of the Linli building. Mei Ruhan sat at a small table to do accounts. Luo Yichen's upper body was naked. The hot sweat dripped along the perfect muscle lines to the ground. As he punched the wooden pile, he was calm and happy. It seemed that there would be no problem for him to live like this until the end of time. At this moment, Haydn's head suddenly stretched out from the door and shouted, "Boss Luo, the bosses are looking for you." Mei Ruhan was looking at Luo Yichen in a daze. She was suddenly awakened by the voice. She was scared like a frightened deer and quickly lowered her head to pretend to do the accounts. Luo Yichen looked back and couldn't help but smile. When he turned his head again, he had calmed down and a glimmer of light flashed through his eyes. "Take me there." It had been more than a month. Did the woman finally give him a task again? Since he recovered, he hadn't done anything. He hoped that this task wouldn't let her down. At least it could prove that he didn't stay in the Linli building for nothing. Every time Luo Yichen saw that Chu Qingning and others were busy while he was idle, he would naturally feel uncomfortable. It seemed that he hadn't been completely trusted by the girl. But he was also like a dull gourd. It was impossible for him to take the initiative to ask for a task like Chu Qingning did. Luo Yichen got dressed and followed Haydn all the way to the door of the addendum. His pupils shrank slightly. He had lived here for 2 months, but he didn't know that there was an addendum in the Linli building. "Boss Luo, Boss Li lets you in, which means that she has completely trusted you. Don't let her down." Haydn smiled and opened the door of the addendum. He beckoned Luo Yichen to go in. Luo Yichen snorted and didn't answer. He walked in with his head held high. Although he couldn't tell Chu Qingning and others about his origin, he disdained to bite the hand that fed him. "Oh, I'm coming, Luo Laosi." Seeing Luo Yichen coming in, Chu Qingning immediately put his arm around Luo Yichen's shoulder and said, "You could have come here a long time ago. Unfortunately, there are no decent tasks recently. Now, here comes a task." "What task?" Luo Yichen couldn't help but ask. He immediately looked at Su Li sitting in the middle. He couldn't help but slightly open his thin lips and his eyes were full of shock. She didn't wear a veil. She looked younger than me. She was a little beautiful, although not as lovely as Ruhan. For a moment, Luo Yichen had countless thoughts in his mind. But his knowledge in the Qinghe town was limited, so he didn't know that Su Li had other identities. At midnight tomorrow, there will be a confrontation in the ruined temple in the mountain outside the Qinghe town. You should be more familiar with that place than any of us. Luo Yichen nodded. He had lived there for nearly half a year. Of course, he was familiar with that place. Su Li crossed her fingers and leaned on the back of the chair. She smiled slightly and said, "Your task is to contact the people of the satrap's mansion and the Qinghe girls' school as the protector of the Linli building tomorrow. Then, together with the soldiers, you will secretly protect the female lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school who is going to negotiate with the thieves. Do you understand?" Luo Yichen's pupils shrank slightly and he said, "I will contact the people of the satrap's mansion." He was a fugitive. Wasn't it a little too bold to contact the people of the government? "Don't worry, fourth brother." Chu Qingning smiled and made a circle with his fingers. He said, "An appearance disguise pill will make Ruhan unable to recognize you." Luo Yichen's expression was slightly relaxed. He forgot that Su Li's medical skills were extremely profound. An appearance disguise pill was nothing to her. Su Li took out the green porcelain bottle and threw it to Luo Yichen. She was no longer lazy and reminded seriously, "Be careful tomorrow. It is not ruled out that there will be an inborn expert involved in this matter. If you put your life first, I don't want to see the Linli building, which has just made some progress, to suffer losses." Hearing that, everyone was shocked and nodded slightly. Luo Yichen pinched the porcelain bottle in his hand and there was an inexplicable emotion in his heart. Usually, except for Chu Qingning, who was easy to get along with, Fang Yuan and Fang Mu regarded him as a waste. They didn't regard him as a new force of the Linli building at all. Even the lowest level waiters of the Linli building had some complaints about him, but they didn't say it in front of him. Mei Ruhan heard a lot of complaints, but she preferred to be wronged alone and never mentioned it to him. This time, the Linli building seemed to have a collective action. He could finally show his cultivation and really get the respect of Fang Yuan and the people of the Linli building. Thinking of this, Luo Yichen was looking forward to the next day. Fang Yuan and others noticed the excitement in Luo Yichen's heart. They were all confused. Did Luo Yichen really want to devote himself to the Linli building until his last breath? It was okay for them to take revenge, but why did Luo Yichen do it? The next day, the Qinghe town was bustling as usual. Ordinary people lived their own lives and didn't notice that the governor of the Linli building was facing an unprecedented crisis today. Zai, check the number of troops again. Yan Shixuan ordered. He looked serious and was a little upset. He always felt that things would not be as simple as he thought. If the enemy deliberately exposed their position, they could set up an ambush. But if it was so easy to deal with them, would Wu Yun still be Wu Yun? Dad, we have checked 5 times. They are all the direct elite soldiers of the mansion. The news is also tightly blocked. There can be no traitors. Yan Zai was dressed in a suit, and Yan Hongshou, who was also dressed as a martial arts practitioner, followed him. When Yan Shixuan saw Yan Hongshou, he immediately frowned and said, "Hongshou, what are you doing here? Go back to accompany your mother." Hongshou suddenly curled her lips and said, "No. I want to go too. Why can the third brother go but I can't? I can already draw this bow halfway. Its deterrent power is no worse than that of Dad." Hongshou pointed to the silver bow behind her and said angrily. Chapter 132. Lord, the people of the Linli building are coming. Just when Yan Shixuan and his daughter were staring at each other, a subordinate reported. Yan Shixuan immediately came to his sense and then said with a very solemn expression, "Hongshou, you stay. I also have an important task for you. After we leave, the defense of the satrap's mansion will be weak. You use the bow in your hand to protect the satrap's mansion and mother. Can you do it?" Seeing Yan Shixuan's serious expression for the first time, Yan Hongshou was immediately filled with a great sense of responsibility. She nodded happily and said, "Dad, don't worry. I won't even let a mosquito into the satrap's mansion." "Good. You deserve to be my good daughter." Yan Shixuan praised and immediately asked someone to take Yan Hongshou to make arrangements. Yan Zai saw that his sister was cheated by his father to stay. He couldn't help crying and laughing. At this time, his father didn't forget to tease his sister. It was really, "Do you think I am joking?" A serious voice suddenly came. Yan Zai's expression changed. He raised his head and wondered, "Isn't it?" Yan Shixuan sighed softly and said with a complicated expression, "It is an impossible promise to pull the bow." But she met Mr. Li and the impossible became possible. In this case, there is no reason for me to stop her. I will go back to persuade her mother. Yan Zai had goosebumps all over his body. He couldn't help but say excitedly, "Then Yan Shixuan smiled softly and didn't know what expression he had. He said, "As for you, if you can pass this time safely, I won't stop you. But my Xiangong is a taboo. If you want to improve your cultivation, go to the Linli building." "Thank you, Dad." Yan Zai immediately knelt down and kowtowed 3 times. Yan Shixuan shook his head. He didn't know whether his sudden decision was right or not. He once vowed that he would never get involved in the affairs of that circle again. But both of his children were eager to learn martial arts. In front of the gate of the satrap's mansion, Luo Chen stood in a group of elite soldiers and quietly waited for the arrival of Yan Shixuan. He looked around with a pair of bright eyes. He was familiar with many of these elite soldiers. Half a year ago, he was chased like a mouse. Haha, you must be the fourth Protector Qin that Mr. Li mentioned, right? What a young hero. Luo Chen looked up and saw Yan Shixuan in casual clothes coming over with a smile. Yan Shixuan looked friendly. He felt extremely dangerous from Luo Chen. Although they were both at the peak of the acquired realm, they were not at the same level. In other words, Yan Shixuan's potential had been exhausted, and he would be stuck at the peak of the Hotian realm for the rest of his life. However, the grim-faced youth in front of him had already reached the threshold of the peak of the Hotian realm. It seemed as if he only needed to pierce through a piece of paper to easily step into the Xiantian realm. Even the four protectors of the Linli building have such a cultivation. It's really horrible. How many young masters are there in the Linli building? Yan Shixuan was shocked and couldn't help but think so. But she didn't know that Luo Chen was the most powerful person in the entire Linli building except Su Li. Being praised by Yan Shixuan, Luo Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If he saw Yan Shixuan 2 months ago, he would definitely run away. But now, he was not nervous. Instead, he slightly cupped his hands and replied in a low voice, "I'm flattered." Seeing that Luo Chen was not good with words, but was not so difficult to get along with, Yan Shixuan was relieved. He asked Luo Chen to wait for a while, and then he summoned all the elite soldiers. A group of hundreds of people quietly went out of the city from the secret passage to the ruined temple. In the blink of an eye, it was already dark. At the city gate, Su Li drove the carriage slowly away from the Qinghe town. When Ruomin looked at the carriage going away, she clenched her hands, and her palms could not stop sweating. Don't let anything happen. Su Li looked calm and lowered her head to touch the amulet on her chest. She had returned the amulet to Wen Ruomin after she came back. Now Wen Ruomin gave it to her again. Luo Chen, who was waiting outside the city gate, saw the carriage coming and immediately became spirited. Coming. On the way, he left Yan Shixuan's team. After familiarizing himself with the environment from the ruined temple to the Qinghe town gate, he came back and hid in the weeds beside the official road, quietly waiting for the female lecturer to appear. After all, his task was different from that of the government. He was mainly entrusted to protect others' safety. The carriage slowly approached. Luo Chen looked tense and was about to follow it secretly. But when he saw the girl in the carriage, he suddenly stopped and fell into a dull look. Then he felt a deep pain in the balls and didn't know where to start. What the fuck was actually Li? Since she was in the carriage, what was the use of squatting here for a long time like a fool? Don't give yourself away. I am the lecturer of the girls' school who needs to be protected. At this time, Su Li transmitted the sound in silence to him. Luo Chen was stunned and his eyes were shining. He had no time to think too much and immediately followed her secretly. The ruined temple was built on the mountain, and the road was not very smooth. Su Li had to give up the carriage and walk to the back road. Under the cover of the night, the forest with mottled shadows was unspeakably gloomy and horrible. Looking at the timid fear on Su Li's face, Luo Chen, who followed her secretly, was even more painful. Her acting skills were even more terrible than her cultivation. If he didn't know Su Li's other identity first, he couldn't believe that this seemingly weak girl turned out to be a temperamental witch. The hour gradually approached. After a seemingly difficult trek, Su Li finally arrived at the ruined temple. Squeak! The harsh sound of pushing the door came from Su Li's hand, which shocked the elite soldiers lurking around. After the door was opened, they didn't see a figure. The beggars who usually stayed here didn't know where they went. Suli walked in with a frightened face and kept looking around, but she knew in her heart that there was no one here at all. Unless the person was beyond the inborn realm, he couldn't hide from her. Walking into the ruined temple, Suli saw the strange red paper on the ground, which couldn't be more conspicuous. She immediately walked over and picked it up and opened it. You are really a smart and brave little girl. When you see this paper, it shows that you are still a little filial. If you want to save your father's family, come out of the ruined temple now. Don't talk to anyone. Get on the fast horse at the foot of the mountain in the north of the temple as fast as you can. It will take you to see me. If you dare to say a word, wait to collect your father's corpse. The law of the Dahan country won't care about your feelings. Suli's eyes flashed after seeing it. She immediately ran down the north side of the cliff. Sure enough, she saw a lonely horse tied to a tree. This group of horses was very handsome. At first glance, she knew that they were extremely fast horses. Suli did not hesitate to get on the horse. The horse seemed to be controlled by drugs. After Suli sat on it, she immediately ran wildly and disappeared into the depths of the forest. Oh no! Yen Shirshuan, who caught up with Suli, suddenly changed his face when he saw Suli ran away. At this time, Yen Zai hurried over with the red paper in his hand. Dad, look. Yen Shirshuan took it and read it. He was angry inside. This silly girl. She is going to die in vain. She can't save her father at all. He wanted to seize this opportunity to catch Wu Yun. Although they would inevitably face the threat of the Gong family in the future, at least they could solve this crisis. But Wu Yun's cunning and ruthlessness were far beyond his calculation. By the way, where is Protector Qin? Yen Shirshuan suddenly remembered. He turned around and looked around. It was quiet and there seemed to be no one around. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope in his heart. Protector Qin, it's up to you this time. On the mountain road, Luo Chen silently followed the marks made by Suli all the way. He cursed the horse in his heart. It had been running wildly for an hour. Even he couldn't bear it, let alone an ordinary horse. He didn't want to follow her. If Suli couldn't beat the horse, he would just be a dead end. But before Suli left, she transmitted the sound to him in silence and asked him to follow her secretly. He could only bitterly chase a horse and eat the dust. Suli sat on the horse, and the scenery around her passed by at a very fast speed. At the same time, she also sensed that the breath of the horse under her was declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. This means... I didn't expect that Wu Yun had something to do with those rats. Suli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of interest, and then she recovered her pale face in an instant. The horse was about to die. If there was no accident, they should arrive at their destination. Wheezing, wheezing, the horse panted violently, and its speed was getting slower and slower. Luo Chen could hear it from a distance. He immediately became alert and lightened his steps. He poured the water in the depression beside the mountain on his body to cover the smell of sweat, and then quietly followed up. Plop! The horse under her fell to the ground, and Suli staggered and was thrown out. She fell awkwardly beside a wooden house by a small river. The gravel on the ground rubbed her arms and made them bleed. Suli bowed her head and cried out in pain. When she heard the sound of the wooden door opening, she suddenly looked at the wooden door uneasily like a frightened rabbit. Squeak! A short old man dressed in a gray robe slowly walked out of the door. His turbid pupils glowed with green light, which didn't look like a human's eyes. At this moment, he looked at Suli as if he was looking at delicious food. Ha ha ha, you are really a good little girl. I know your meat is tender and delicious. The old man in a gray robe laughed gloomily with yellow teeth. Then Su Li saw that he took out a lump of black plaster from under his robe, and said impatiently, "Well done. The amount of this medicine is enough to poison all the people in the satrap's mansion. I can't wait to enjoy the sacrifice. Get out of here." Wu Yun was overjoyed when she heard the words. She immediately took the poison invitation respectfully, and the fear in her eyes increased. She stepped back again and again. "In this case, Master, I'm leaving." As she said, she carefully put away the poison and glanced at Su Li quite happily. Then she left along the night road without saying anything. She didn't want to stay here even for one more second. Only Su Li and the old man in a gray robe were left in the field. The old man in a gray robe was more excited. Looking at Su Li, who was kneeling on the ground like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, as if she was too scared to stand up straight, he happily took a bottle of bone-softening powder from the house. At the same time, he shook his left sleeve, revealing a shining claw blade instead of his hand. "Hum hum, hum hum. Baby, don't be afraid," the old man in a gray robe came to Su Li and hummed. He pinched Su Li's mouth with his right hand and poured the bone-softening powder into her mouth. After Su Li ate the bone-softening powder, the old man in a gray robe was completely relaxed. But the claw blade in his left hand was aimed at the skin between Su Li's neck, and he was about to cut it. At this moment, a cold light flashed and instantly penetrated the old man's throat. Even Su Li's eyes were still full of fear, and there was no murderous intention. The old man in a gray robe was shocked. His hands trembled and he wanted to pull out the dagger in his neck, but he didn't dare to. He made a ho-ho sound in his throat, and his eyes were full of disbelief. He was actually plotted against by a young girl who had no strength to truss a chicken? It was too much. Su Li in front of him didn't have any fear and uneasiness at all. He even saw that she nimbly took out a dagger from nowhere and stabbed it into his heart. Although you may not be good at the tricks of the Lianshi cult, you still have to guard against them. Su Li spat out the bone-softening powder in her mouth and sneered. "How do you know that I am?" The old man in a gray robe widened his eyes and died before he finished his words. Su Li pulled out the dagger in the heart of the old man in a gray robe. Seeing the dark red blood with 60% gray flowing out, she slightly narrowed her eyes. She didn't expect that it was a big fish. According to the words of the Lianshi cult, the ability of the old man should be comparable to the inborn seventh hurdle. Unfortunately, he lost his vigilance in front of Su Li and died here without using 1% of his strength. Clatter! Luo Yichen, who was covered with dirty water, came out of the forest. When he saw the old man in a gray robe who had become a corpse on the ground, he breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't help but feel discouraged. As expected, with Su Li, he had no chance to fight at all. Only the one in his hand could be counted as a result. Chapter 133. Hearing the movement, Su Li turned around and glanced at Luo Yichen. She gently wiped the blood on the 2 daggers on the chest of the old man in a gray robe and took them back. Luo Yichen put down Wu Yun and walked to Su Li to look at the old man in a gray robe. But because of his limited knowledge, he didn't see anything. "Did you see anyone else along the way?" After dealing with the body of the old man in a gray robe, Su Li turned around and asked. Seeing Su Li's skillful and casual movements, Luo Yichen was slightly shocked and shook his head quickly. "No." Su Li's expression showed a touch of understanding, and she pondered a little more. She thought that Wu Yun was the initiator of stealing official silver in the Qinghe town. Now seeing the old man in a gray robe, she suddenly found that things were not as simple as she thought. It was very likely that Wu Yun was just a puppet and the blood-refining hall was the real manipulator behind the scenes. Trouble. Su Li frowned. She absolutely didn't want to see the forces of the martial arts circle so early. The Leanly building was just starting out. It was like a baby who had just learned to crawl in front of the blood-refining hole. Thinking of this, Suli got up and walked to the cabin. Although the old man in a gray robe set some small traps, it was not a problem for the experienced Suli. After searching the cabin carefully, Suli found no clues except a few secret letters between the old man in a gray robe and Wu Yun. Soon, the cabin was on fire. Suli held the torch and her eyes were shining. No one knew what she was thinking. Luo Yichen held Wu Yun under his armpit with one hand and stood aside. He wanted to urge Suli to leave immediately for several times, but he swallowed the words. Looking at the fire, it was not difficult for Suli to know that Yan Shushuan and others were coming. It would be too late if they didn't leave now. When she was thinking of this, suddenly there was a rustle in the forest. Two young figures came out. They were Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan. Seeing that Suli and Luo Yichen were safe and Wu Yun was caught, they were relieved. Have the marks along the way been destroyed? Suli suddenly asked, but Chu Qingning smiled and said, of course, we still have a little vigilance. Luo Yichen blushed and felt ashamed secretly. His family background determined that he could not be as careful as Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning. He never thought about the problem of marking on the road all the way. Fang Yuan, you and Chu Qingning leave secretly with Wu Yun. Don't disturb Yan Shushuan. Su Li's expression was indifferent, but her tone was a little urgent. She pointed to another path that couldn't be walked by horses and signaled Fang Yuan and Bai Shishuang to leave quickly. Then she picked up the claw knife that hadn't been melted on the ground and pulled it fiercely to her left arm. Puchi! A bloody wound appeared on the outside of his right arm, extending from his wrist to his shoulder. It was deep and long. The sound of blood splattering caused the eyebrows of the three youths to twitch. They felt a chill in their hearts. Even if they were pretending to be injured, there was no need to be so ruthless, right? The wound was so big that one could almost peel off his skin. The severe pain stimulated Suli to frown slightly. Seeing that Fang Yuan and Suli didn't leave, she immediately raised her eyebrows and said with slight anger, "What are you waiting for? Let's go." Fang Yuan woke up immediately. He took Luo Yichen, Wu Yun and Chu Qingning and disappeared on the path. At the moment when he passed by Luo Yichen, his lips buzzed, but no sound came out. Take care of her. Suddenly receiving the sound transmitted by Fang Yuan, Luo Yichen was surprised and immediately laughed. It turned out that this blockhead was interested in Su Li. Luo Yichen, carry me on your back to meet Yan Shushuan later and say this. Su Li threw the claw knife into the sea of fire and destroyed it. Then she told Luo Yichen again. Then she swallowed a mass of white powder and fell into his arms in astonishment. No wonder you want me to carry her on my back. Luo Yichen was just wondering that Su Li's right arm was injured and he only needed to hold her. Why was she so delicate that he had to carry her on his back? It turned out that she was going to swallow the bone-softening powder. Such a large amount was enough for ordinary people to sleep for a day and a night. Even a senior of the inborn realm would be powerless for a while. Was she really not afraid that he would take the opportunity to do something? Taking a deep breath, Luo Yichen did not forget to simply bandage Su Li's arm. Then he carried Su Li on his back and walked back. He whispered, "The situation forced me to do so." This is not a betrayal of Ruhan. Su Li lowered her head weakly, but there was a trace of a smile at the corner of her mouth. She did this to create the illusion that the death of the elder of the Lianshi cult had nothing to do with the Qinghe town. But she was also taking the opportunity to test Luo Yichen. Fortunately, Luo Yichen did not let her down. Luo Yichen carried Su Li on his back for a while. Finally, he saw the elite soldiers looking for them in the forest. He took the initiative to show up. The elite soldiers were overjoyed and immediately shouted, "Lord, come quickly. We found Miss Su Li." The transmission speed was very fast. In less than 5 minutes, Yan Shixuan appeared in front of Luo Yichen. Seeing the blood stains on the two people, his face suddenly changed. He stepped forward to check Su Li's breath. After knowing that the latter was still alive, he was relieved and quickly said, "Thank you for your help, Protector Qin. Don't hesitate. Send Su Li to be healed quickly. Let's talk about other things later." Luo Yichen nodded and said, "It's reasonable." After a busy night, in the satrap's mansion, the old doctor stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Workshop owner Su's injury this time is much lighter than last time. But she lost too much blood and a large dose of knockout drug in her body. So, she will not wake up for a while. But these are all trivial matters. I will prescribe a prescription to help workshop owner Su recover." Yan Shixuan was overjoyed when he heard that. He repeatedly held his hands and said, "Thank you for your hard work. This way, please." Yan Shixuan left with the doctor. Yan Hongxiu looked at Su Li, who was lying on the bed with her eyes closed and face pale. Her eyes were red. Last time, Su Li was injured for no reason because of the Jin family. This time, she was cut for helping them. What if there was a scar in such an obvious position in the future? After Yan Shixuan sent the doctor away, the smile on his face disappeared. He returned to a dignified expression and came to the front hall. Luo Yichen, who had been waiting here for a long time, immediately stood up and pretended to be concerned. "Is the miss okay?" Yan Shixuan smiled bitterly and said, "Protector Qin is as kind as Mr. Li. The miss is fine. Thank you for waiting for me for a long time. Now can you tell me what happened last night?" Luo Yichen felt strange when he was praised for being kind. But he still looked serious and followed Su Li's instructions. He said, "Last night, I felt something was wrong and tried my best to catch up with her. But I was still late." Yan Shixuan frowned more and more. In Luo Yichen's words, Su Li was a lamb at the mercy of others. He didn't know what kind of medicine she was fed. Her whole body was soft. And a black-robed man was cutting her arm slowly with a claw knife. Yan Shixuan immediately went to stop him, but he couldn't stop the black-robed man. Considering Su Li's injury, he went back directly. It could be said that except for saving Su Li, Luo Yichen didn't find anything helpful to the case. Yan Shixuan didn't doubt that Luo Yichen lied. Because the Linli building didn't need to hide any news. The Yan family and the Linli building were now in the same boat. Well, it's lucky that workshop owner Su can survive. Yan Shixuan smiled bitterly and said, "The Gong family deserves to be an aristocratic family in Yunjing. I admit defeat. Lord Yan, you don't need to belittle yourself." Luo Yichen's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, "Although I can't see the background of the black-robed man who escaped, they are likely to come from the martial arts circle, not the subordinates of Madame Wu Yun. I'm afraid that my master can explain the specific speculation to you." Yan Shixuan's expression changed dramatically. He was shocked and said, "The power of the martial arts circle? How is it possible? How can the Yan family provoke such a giant?" Luo Yichen didn't say much. He stood up and cupped his fists and said, "I've said what I should say. If you want to know more, you might as well wait for Miss Su to wake up and bring her to the Linli building. My master can infer more things." Yan Shixuan came to his sense and quickly stood up to thank him. "Protector Qin, it's really thanks to you this time. I can't thank you enough. After Su Li wakes up, I will definitely visit her." After a night, Su Li opened her eyes faintly, which made many people who cared about her feel relieved. Yan Shixuan hurried over and looked a little guilty and hesitant. He wanted to take Su Li to the Linli building immediately. But when he saw Su Li's tightly wrapped left arm, he felt embarrassed to say it. Su Li showed a weak smile and said softly, "Satrap Yen, you can say it directly." Although Su Li was frightened this time, she was not seriously hurt. "Hongxiu has just told me that the matter of the official silver has not been solved. If there is anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask." Yan Shixuan thought about it and turned his head to stare at Yan Hongxiu, who was guarding the bed. Yan Hongxiu lowered her head aggrievedly. It was Su Li who asked her. How could she not say it? It couldn't be hidden. Looking at Su Li's pleading eyes, Yan Shixuan sighed and said, "Su Li, my Yan family is sorry to you and your Su family. You just woke up, but I have to take you to a place immediately." After 10 minutes, Su Li stood in front of the Linli building with her left arm hanging. She felt a little strange in her heart. It was the first time for her to come here as Su Li. Yin Shuedong, who had been waiting in front of the door, saw Yan Shixuan and Su Li. She immediately stepped forward and bowed slightly. "My master has been waiting for you on the top floor for a long time." Then, Yin Shuedong stepped aside and reached out her hand to lead the way. Yan Shixuan said, "Thank you." Then he took Su Li upstairs. When they came to the attic on the top floor, Yan Shixuan found that there was a thick gauze curtain in the open space in front of the desk. It was faintly seen that a woman was sitting inside. Two expressionless young men stood on both sides of the gauze curtain as if strangers were not allowed to enter. "Lord Yan, I have been practicing martial arts to a critical point recently. It is not suitable for me to see others and affect my state of mind. If Protector Chen didn't say that, I would not force myself to come out. Let's talk like this today." The familiar voice came out from the gauze curtain. Yan Shixuan was relieved. It was taboo to ask others about their practice. He directly cupped his hands and said, "I will comply with your request. But do you have any thoughts about what Protector Chen said last night?" "Ha ha ha. I just guessed it. But when I saw the girl's face, I was sure that it was those rats who did it." The laughter in the gauze curtain made Yan Shixuan's heart skip a beat. He asked in a deep voice, "Who did it? Please tell me clearly." The girl's face is pale. It seems that she has lost too much blood. But if you look carefully, you can see that there is a blue color between her eyebrows and red hair on her temples. She has been fed the bone-softening powder. The bone-softening powder is not a common drug. It is effective even for the inborn realm. It is very valuable. There are few forces who can feed the bone-softening powder to a little girl regardless of the weight. With the analysis of the voice in the gauze curtain, the truth seemed to be peeled off and gradually became clear. Yan Shixuan's face became more and more ugly. At the same time, he faintly relaxed. "Satrap Yen, is the wound on the girl's left arm very deep and long, and the wound is extremely smooth from top to bottom?" Yan Shixuan immediately nodded and said, "Mr. Li's description is extremely accurate. It seems that you saw it with your own eyes." Chu Qingning, who was standing beside the gauze curtain and disguised, couldn't help but secretly pout his mouth. He not only saw it with his own eyes, but also made the wound by himself. How could it not be accurate? That's right. Paralyze the whole body with the bone-softening powder and then peel off the skin and flesh to make the puppet of the living dead. This is the method of the Lianshi cult. The members of the Lianshi cult probably fancy the girl's appearance and want to make her into a puppet to keep them by their side to appreciate. The tone in the gauze curtain was light, but everyone present felt numb. Corpse Refinement Sect. Just by listening to it, one could tell that this sect was definitely not a righteous sect. The Lianshi cult, Yan Shixuan's face was ugly. He finally sighed and stood up. He held his hands and said, Wu Yun also disappeared. It is difficult to solve the problem of the official silver. Please tell me how to solve it. Ho ho. Chapter 134. Hearing Mr. Li's words, Yan Shishuan was tense for a moment and then relaxed. He said with a wry smile, "You are right. It is not the time to investigate my dereliction of duty. Today I will report the matter to the imperial court and wait for the punishment." "Lord Yan, Su Li was moved." When she was about to say something, a voice came from the gauze tent, "Lord Yan, don't worry. The power of the Lianshi cult is beyond your imagination. As long as Su Li testifies, your Yan family will not be affected. However, it is hard to say what will happen to those families who have cooperated with the Lianshi cult. Thank you, Mr. Li." Yan Shishuan didn't show any optimism when he heard the words in the gauze tent. He just got up and cupped his hands. Then he left with Su Li in a hurry. After Su Li left, everyone was relaxed. Chu Qingning also took off the gauze tent. Fong Ling, who was wearing the clothes of Mr. Li, was sitting inside. She held a shell-like poisonous insect in her hand. She ran to Fong Yuan proudly and said, "Eldest brother. Did I act like her?" Fong Yuan smiled softly and shook his head helplessly. There was no need to act. Fong Ling just sat there and didn't move. But he still praised, "You are very good. My Ling is the best." Fong Ling immediately smiled happily. She carefully put the poisonous insect back into the brocade box on the desk and then went to work. "I didn't expect that Su Li has such a magical poisonous insect. I have been in the Nanjiang country for more than 10 years, but I have never seen it." Chu Qingning looked at the sound acquaintance and clicked his tongue in wonder. Fong Yuan was calm. He was not surprised by how many magical things the magical girl had. He just felt that he seemed to have seen this poisonous insect before, but he couldn't remember it. Maybe in a dream. Fong Yuan smiled and didn't think too much. Luo Yichen glanced at the two people who were still busy cleaning up and went downstairs to find Mei Ruhan. After he came back, the scene that Su Li cut herself with the claw knife without hesitation always appeared in his mind. There was no fear in her eyes. Luo Yichen couldn't help but tremble in his heart. She was as calm as eating and drinking. What a ruthless woman. No matter to the enemy or to herself. Ruhan is better. Su Li lived under the heavy protection of the Yan mansion for 7 days, and then she got the news from the imperial court. "Su Li, it's great. Not only did the imperial court not blame my father, but they also sent the chancellor of the Supreme Court to help solve the case. I heard that there were many masters accompanying him to deal with the Lianshi cult." Yan Hongxiu couldn't keep secrets. As soon as she heard it from Yan Zai, she immediately came to tell Su Li. Su Li was relieved when she heard the words. Even if she was 90% sure, there was still a 10% chance of an accident. Fortunately, she was not so unlucky this time. Yan Shishuan was also smart. He had blocked the news from the imperial court and turned a blind eye to the arrogant coercion of the Jin and Lin clans. He even pretended that nothing had happened when many of his properties were forcibly seized. The Jin family and the Lin family thought that the Yan family had completely admitted defeat, so they became even more arrogant. Although they could not contact Wu Yun all of a sudden, the Yan family's various cowardice showed signs of admitting defeat. After Su Li's arm got better, she left the Yan mansion and returned to the school. She was finally free and returned to the Linli building. In the underground addendum, Su Li looked at Wu Yun, who was muddle-headed and demented. Although Wu Yun was stubborn, few people could keep their secrets under the influence of her ecstasy poison. "We got the whereabouts of the official silver. But when we went to investigate, there was no one there. Obviously, the Lianshi cult noticed it." Fong Yuan added. Su Li nodded slightly and said, "It would be strange if they were still there." The official silver handed over to the imperial court every year is usually tens of millions of taels. With their connections in the martial arts circle, they can exchange it for a large number of practicing resources. It is impossible for them to let go. But how did they transport so much silver that night? Tens of millions of taels of silver are hundreds of thousands of kilograms. Feng Yuan frowned tightly. This was the only thing he couldn't figure out. Su Li smiled and said softly, "A warrior in the inborn first hurdle can carry thousands of kilograms." Yesterday, the old man in the gray robe was in the inborn seventh hurdle and was proficient in the skill of corpse control. It was not difficult for him to carry things of hundreds of thousands of kilograms. Feng Yuan suddenly understood and was slightly shocked. The old man who was killed and destroyed by Su Li last night had such a horrible cultivation. What was Su Li's cultivation? Seeing that Feng Yuan was absent-minded, Su Li didn't expose him. She told him to take good care of Wu Yun and not to kill her. Then she returned to the school. Calculating the time, the people of the imperial court should arrive. There were many useless officers in the supreme judiciary, but there were also many real experts in solving cases. The official silver was stolen, so the people who came must not be too bad. With such thoughts, an inconspicuous carriage finally stopped at the door of the secret door of the Yen mansion. A middle-aged guard disguised as an ordinary groom opened the curtain, and a young man with an indifferent expression got off the carriage. The young man's face was not handsome, but very good-looking. Especially the pair of strange lavender eyes, from which the sharp and wise eyes seemed to be able to see through the stars and penetrate the starry sky. He was obviously a young man in his early 20s, but people felt that he was more like a wise old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. He exuded an unfathomable pneuma as high as the mountain and as deep as the sea. Behind the young man, another teenager came down. He also wore casual clothes. Although he looked handsome, his temperament was much more ordinary than that of the young man. However, he also had vitality and potential that the young man didn't have. This is the Qinghe provincial mansion. A faint light flashed in the young man's eyes, but there were infinite emotions in the teenager's eyes. He said, "Qinghe provincial mansion, I am back again." The middle-aged guard took out a bundle from the carriage, and then the three people were secretly welcomed in by the satrap's mansion. Satrap Yen was full of anxiety and paced back and forth in the room. When he saw the housekeeper leading the three people in, he immediately greeted them and said to the middle-aged guard, "Your Excellency, you come from afar. The situation is special. I can't let you come in from the front door." "I'm sorry." The middle-aged guard looked cold and raised his eyebrows. He let the young man appear in front of Satrap Yen and said, "Lord Yen, this is the imperial envoy from the Supreme Judiciary in Yunjing." There was a moment of silence, and the atmosphere was extremely embarrassing. The young man had a gentle smile on his face, and he was not angry at being recognized. He gently patted the folding fan in his hand, and said in a magnetic voice like spring breeze, "Lord Yen, I am Ling Qinglan, the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. This time, I come to investigate the case of the theft of official silver. Please cooperate with me." When Yen Shixuan heard the name of the young man, he was shocked. He was happy and flattered and said, "I don't dare. It turns out that you are the first young master in solving cases in Yunjing. With Milord taking action, we will definitely be able to recover the stolen official silver." Ling Qinglan kept smiling and said, "It's hard to say. Your Excellency said in the book that some forces of the martial arts circle intervened. Cases with the intervention of the martial arts circle are very troublesome." Yen Shixuan smiled bitterly and inadvertently looked at the young man behind Ling Qinglan. He couldn't help but frown. Why did he look a little familiar? Noticing Yen Shixuan's gaze, Ling Qinglan pulled the young man out and said with a smile, "I forgot to introduce him. He is the newly promoted officer of the Supreme Judiciary this year. He is from your Qinghe province. Yan Shixuan was shocked and looked at him carefully. The young man looked a little nervous, but he could still keep his composure. He raised his head and said, "Lord Yan, long time no see." After a year, the young man's face matured a lot. He changed the hairstyle of the Supreme Judiciary and grew a lot taller. But Yan Shixuan still recognized him. He pointed at the young man with great shock and said, You are Su Qingtan." He recommended Su Qingtan to Yunjing personally. How could he forget him? But the time didn't match. Shouldn't Su Qingtan still be in the National Academy at this time? Su Qingtan smiled shyly and didn't explain. Ling Qinglan didn't give them time to continue to talk about the old days. He said with a smile, "It's not too late. How about taking us to see the injured female lecturer now?" "That's right." Seeing Ling Qinglan's resolute action, Yan Shixuan was not surprised but happy. He quickly arranged a carriage to go to the Qinghe girls' school. Su Li was still quietly reading in the courtyard of the school and recuperating. This time, her injury would be left to the Supreme Judiciary as evidence. So, since she was injured, she blocked the circulation of genuine energy in her left arm. Although her recovery speed was fast because of her physical body, it was still within the range of normal people. Wow, the forest was rustling. Su Li's ears moved, and her pupils suddenly contracted. She lifted her feet and looked down. She saw a carriage stopped in front of the courtyard. 3 people got off, but she could only sense 2 breaths. It meant that the cultivation of the other person was at least the same as hers. What was more exaggerated was that the youngest among the 3 people was the eldest brother. "This is Lecturer Su's courtyard." Yan Shixuan introduced with a smile and led Ling Qinglan and Su Qingtan in. Mammy Li greeted them and saluted quickly. Then she saw the teenager walking at the end. She suddenly widened her eyes and shouted, First master." "What?" Yan Shixuan was shocked by the sudden address. "What first master?" Su Qingtan was also shocked and said, "Mammy Li, why are you here? What happened to second sister?" At this moment, Su Li appeared at the door. She stared at Su Qingtan, who was no longer childish. Her tears rolled down unconsciously. "Second sister." Su Qingtan exclaimed and couldn't help but hug Su Li tightly. He was silent for a long time. Seeing this scene, Ling Qinglan raised his eyebrows, and Yan Shixuan was directly dumbfounded. He never thought that Su Qingtan and Su Li were from the same family. It was lucky that Su Li came from the Su family. How could there be a real dragon? But the fact slapped him hard. When he recommended Su Qingtan, he checked Su Qingtan's background. But he really didn't remember Su Qingtan's background because he was focused on whether Su Qingtan's background was clean or not. "Second sister, your hand. Was it hit by your mother again?" Su Qingtan's eyes were full of excitement. He was not as calm as before. The first time he saw his second sister was injured, which made him feel guilty. He once vowed that he would never let his second sister get hurt again. But in the past year, his second sister must have suffered a lot of grievances. "Don't worry. This time I will take you to Yunjing. I can protect you and won't let you be bullied again." "Eldest brother, I'm fine." Hearing the conversation between them, Ling Qinglan looked indifferent, but Yan Shixuan's face was a little dark. Su Li used to be beaten by her mother at home. Chapter 135. Eldest brother, it's really not what you think. I live a good life now. This was hurt by a thief. After Su Li explained, Su Qingtan stood aside in a daze. He didn't expect that not only he but also the second sister and the whole Su family had changed greatly after a year. Ling Qinglan didn't have time to pay attention to Su Qingtan and Yan Shixuan, who were in a daze. He gently untied the gauze wrapped around Su Li's left arm, revealing a long scab of blood. Su Qingtan was shocked. It was such a long and deep wound. How painful it must be. Su Li turned her head away and nibbled her lips. But she was thinking quickly. She was recalling whether there was any omission. At that time, although she scratched herself, she also paid attention to the direction of the hook. Even the coroner could not find any clue. But Ling Qinglan couldn't be underestimated. Such a young senior of the inborn realm, and his surname is Ling. Su Li recalled the seniors around him that Ling Li mentioned in the previous life. She matched them one by one and really found a role that matched the young man in front of her. He was the military counselor of the Yinmo cult. Like the head of the Shalu cult, he was the right-hand man of Child Li. People called him Qinghu. His name also had Qing. However, she still needed to test whether they were the same person or not. After all, Ling Qinglan was a member of the Supreme Judiciary. Su Li thought of Su Qingtan again, and her heart sank. After the eldest brother went to Yunjing, he was bound to be involved in disputes. But she didn't expect that Su Qingtan would get involved before she left Qinghe province. After the investigation, Ling Qinglan didn't say any conclusion. He left Su Qingtan and Yan Shixuan to continue the investigation. You are involved in the case. This time you come here to visit your relatives. You can't intervene. Hearing Ling Qinglan's order, Su Qingtan's eyes dimmed. This was the first case after he became the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. But the Su family was indeed involved in it. Even his father was locked in the prison of the satrap's mansion. It was really inappropriate for him to continue the investigation. It turns out that my father also changed your name. Su Li, it sounds much better than before. Yes, eldest brother. My family treats me very well. By the way, my mother also gave birth to the fifth sister. She is here. Mammy Li watched them talking and laughing outside the door. She couldn't help but secretly wipe her tears. It was great that the first master could come back. Although Miss had a lot of power in the dark, she couldn't use it in the open. She had to endure the bullying from First Madam and the others, but with young master around, things would be different. After chatting with Su Li for a long time and coaxing Su Li to sleep, Su Qingtan became serious. He went to the door and called Mammy Li to the room next door. Mammy Li, tell me how second sister has been living in the past year. Don't hide anything. Eldest young master, second miss has suffered too much this year. I almost died a few times. Mammy Li was on Su Li's side and immediately complained to Su Qingtan. Everything happened really. However, she also consciously concealed the other identity of Su Li and did not mention it at all. The more Su Qingtan listened, the gloomier his face became. Although Mammy Li's words were subjective, there were some things that didn't need to be investigated. She could know clearly by asking casually. Moreover, the second sister's status was not low now. There should be a file about her in the Tianya house. If she couldn't find it, she could buy it and read it. Bang! Su Qingtan heard Mammy Li said that ma'am. Su Chui and Zhu Yan united to slander Su Li. They almost sent Su Li to the government office and drowned her in a pig cage, but Su Huanli turned a blind eye. Su Qingtan hammered the table fiercely and his eyes were red. He didn't understand why his family targeted second sister like this and even wanted to kill her. Second sister was so kind and naive. Even if she was treated like this, she still cared about her family. She even risked her life to sound out the enemy for his father and almost died in the hands of the enemy. I was born in the Su family. They are the elders. I can't do anything, but since I am back. Su Qingtan's eyes flashed coldly. Ma'am. Su Chui, Zhu Yan, Su Zipei, don't touch second sister. Ling Qinglan went out of the city to investigate the case alone. He quickly changed his clothes and appeared in the adytum of the Tianya house. The middle-aged guard was also beside him. After reading the files about Su Li, Ling Qinglan was lost in thought. Su Li's life experience was very clean. As for the suffering she suffered in the past and the reason why the Su family hated her, the reason was unclear. When Su Li was Su area, she was simply an insignificant person. It was not worth the manpower and material resources of the Tianya house to collect information. Since there is no problem with Su Li, it is not good news that there are people of the Lianshi cult in the Qinghe town. Ling Qinglan frowned. He took the robe handed over by the middle-aged guard and put it on. Although he was in the inborn realm, his body was not good. Ling Li spent countless treasures to reach the inborn realm in order to compete with the ice toxin in his body. However, the growth rate of the ice toxin was increasing every year. He didn't tell Ling Li this news. Maybe there was a price to pay for any talent in the world. He got a brain that even Ling Li couldn't compare with, but he paid for his health. There were traitors in the Qinghe province before. Although they were cleaned up by the people of the Shalu cult, many files were lost. Some of them were about the stronghold of the Lianshi cult. I didn't do a good job. Please punish me. Looking at the middle-aged scholar who knelt on the ground and shivered, Ling Qinglan responded calmly. He said indifferently, go and accept the punishment. As for the level of punishment, it is up to you. After rebuking the head of the branch, Ling Qinglan was lost in meditation for a long time. The middle-aged guard gently put the files about the Qinghe town on the table. Then he went out and closed the curtain, leaving Ling Qinglan alone. After a long time, there was a cough in the room. The middle-aged guard immediately rushed in with an elixir bottle nervously. But he saw Ling Qinglan holding a file and laughing wildly. The Linli building. There is a mysterious force in the Qinghe town that even the Tianya house can't investigate. Interesting, interesting, Seeing Ling Qinglan coughed again, the middle-aged man immediately stepped forward and poured out a black elixir with a strong fragrance for him. Ling Qinglan took it and swallowed it. Then he stopped coughing. He shook his head angrily and said, "You are so sick. You are useless." The middle-aged guard shook his head silently. He remembered that his master vomited blood every day before he broke through the inborn hurdle and almost waited for death. But now his situation was much better. "Let's go to the Linli building with me," Ling Qinglan said. He took off his thick robe, opened the door and went out. At this moment, in the Linli building, Su Li dressed as Mr. Li and was lost in thought in the dark night. If Ling Qinglan was Qinghu, he would definitely be interested in the Linli building after visiting the Tianya house. She was waiting, and she knew it wouldn't be long. Even Su Qingtan couldn't violate the rules of the Qinghe girls' school. What's more, Su Qingtan was originally from the Qinghe school. He couldn't disgrace the school. Therefore, he moved out this afternoon. But he came to visit frequently. So, Su Li was free at night. "Su Li, Ling Qinglan is here." Chu Qingning came up to report. Su Li nodded slightly. He immediately went to greet them. After a while, Ling Qinglan came to the attic and sat opposite to Su Li with a smile. He finally knew why the Tianya house couldn't find anything. Only the ordinary waiters didn't disguise themselves along the way. Those who had a profound breath had a thin layer of disguise on their faces. He could see it at a glance with his eyesight of the inborn realm. They all disguised themselves. It was impossible to find out their origins. What's more, it was a mystery whether the owner of the Leanly building, Mr. Lee, was a man or a woman. Although the Tianya house judged that the owner was a woman, he couldn't believe it. I'm Ling Qinglan, a junior. Nice to meet you, Mr. Lee. Ling Qinglan's behavior was gentle and elegant. He always held the folding fan in his hand. He could be called a good child. Su Li smiled slightly. For the sake of caution, she manipulated sound acquaintance and replied, Child Ling, you are too modest. If the most outstanding detective in the Supreme Judiciary is also a latecomer, I am afraid that no one in the world can be called outstanding. Ha ha ha, Mr. Lee is really well informed. Ling Qinglan didn't panic at all when his identity was exposed. Instead, he said with a smile, I heard that there is an excellent winery in the Qinghe town. After coming here and having a look, I really feel that it is very good. Although Ling Qinglan said those polite words, his heart slightly sank. The voice just now didn't seem to be a human's language. He couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. It was not difficult for him to guess that the person in front of him must have used some means to communicate with others without making a sound. Tricky. Ling Qinglan felt that the person in front of him was tricky for the second time. The first time was when he met Ling Li. At that time, his health was too weak and he was not as calm as he was now. Mr. Li was really not easy to deal with. Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan continued to say, But don't you think that you have violated a taboo? Oh. What's the taboo? Su Li looked indifferent and said, Li is just taken from the name of the winery. It has no other meaning. Will it offend others? Ling Qinglan looked at Su Li, who was wearing a veil. He slightly grasped the edge of the chair with his fingers and leaned forward. He said in a low voice, Mr. Li reminds me of Child Li, the hierarch of the Yinma cult in Jianghu. Is it possible that Mr. Li has a secret relationship with that hierarch? Giggle. Su Li suddenly trembled with laughter. The weird and indescribable voice made people's hair stand on end. If so, it is really big news in the martial arts circle. Su Li replied in a low voice and then said with a smile, It's a pity. Child Ling should know whether I have a relationship with hierarch or not. Ling Qinglan's pupils immediately contracted for a moment, but his expression didn't change. He still said with a smile, What are you talking about, Mr. Li? Why don't I understand what you're saying? How can I touch such a high and mighty sect master? Child Ling Qinglan, you can't touch him. There is still Qinghu. Su Li's tone was cold. Ling Qinglan's heart contracted violently. Did she know his real identity or guessed it? Although Ling Qinglan tried his best to keep his expression unchanged and even his breathing normal, the shock of his state of mind still affected the only variable. Ahem. Chapter 136. The expression of the middle-aged guard beside Ling Qinglan changed slightly. He was about to take out the elixir from his arms, but Ling Qinglan grabbed his clothes from behind. The middle-aged guard knew what his master meant. Although he was extremely worried, he had to stop. He made a mistake. Ling Qinglan stopped coughing and calmed down. But his heart was cold. From the beginning of the quarrel, he knew that Ms. Li was absolutely not a stupid opponent like those before. His coughing just now must have let Ms. Li see something. Although I don't want to bother Ling Mo, I may let the Shalu cult sound him out this time. Thinking of this, Su Li suddenly stood up and smiled apologetically. The joke is indeed too much. If Child Ling doesn't mind, please accept my apology gift. Ling Qinglan was slightly confused. Even as smart as he was, he didn't understand why Su Li was aggressive and forced him to a dead end, but she apologized and even offered a gift of apology in the next second. Child, please come with me. At this time, Su Li had already stood up to lead the way. Ling Qinglan was slightly shocked and alert, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he patted his folding fan and stood up. You don't have to apologize. But I'm interested to see what the gift is. Ms. Li, please lead the way. Su Li chuckled and went downstairs with Ling Qinglan. She was sure that the person was Qinghu. Although Ling Qinglan heard her words and disguised himself perfectly, and even his heartbeat didn't change, she was proficient in medicine and poison. That cough was enough to expose a lot. It turns out that Qinghu has a hidden disease. No wonder she died the earliest in the previous life. Su Li thought. She established the force to help him, but she could only be a spy. She couldn't do it openly. How to cure Ling Qinglan's injury without being noticed was still a problem. When she was thinking, they had come to the door of the addendum. Ling Qinglan narrowed his eyes slightly, but the middle-aged guard behind him had already stepped forward and stood in front of him. Su Li glanced back and said nothing. She opened the door of the addendum and walked in step by step. Ling Qinglan took a deep breath and started to follow her. The tunnel was very short and very quiet. There was no mechanism. Or, it didn't start. Ling Qinglan was slightly relieved. He was finally sure that at least now the Linli building was not hostile to the Yimou cult. Otherwise, if he went deep into the hinterland with only one guard, the Linli building would have 100 ways to kill him. Creak, Su Li opened a door and gestured to Ling Qinglan. She said softly, "This is an apology gift. Child Ling, please." Ling Qinglan walked closer and saw the situation in the room. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. He said, "Wu Yun. It's actually here. Child, you should know that Lord Yen asked the Linli building to protect the little girl secretly." In fact, Wu Yun was also there that day, and it seemed that she had a good relationship with the Lianchi cult. Speaking of which, the Gong family has a good status in Yunjing, right? Hearing Su Li's words, Ling Qinglan was slightly embarrassed. The influence of the Tianya house almost penetrated into the streets and alleys of Yunjing. They knew the details of every aristocratic family very well, but they didn't find the connection between the Gong family and the Lianchi cult. Clearly, this was not normal. Feeling the seriousness of the matter, the smile on Ling Qinglan's face disappeared. He slightly made a fist and palm salute to Su Li and said, "Thank you, Ms. Li. I will remember this big gift. Can I take Wu Yun away?" Su Li nodded slightly and said in a relaxed tone, "This is an apology gift for Child Ling. Madame Gong is naturally at your disposal. But the Linli building also hopes that Child Ling will not bite the hand that feeds you. The Linli family is small and just wants to sell wine peacefully. But we can't stand the destruction of the Shalu cult. If we can meet in Yunjing in the future, I hope that you can be lenient and give the Linli building a way out." Ling Qinglan was slightly shocked. He didn't nod or shake his head. He asked the middle-aged guard to carry Wu Yun. After saying goodbye, he walked out of the Linli building. The carriage left quickly. The Tianya house was on the first-class street, only 2 streets away from the Linli building. The middle-aged guard deliberately took a few circles. After confirming that no one followed him, he entered the Tianya house through the secret door. As soon as he got off the carriage, he didn't care about Wu Yun, and immediately took out the elixir. Ling Qinglan shook his head and asked the middle-aged guard to put away the elixir. Then he asked him to carry Wu Yun down. The middle-aged guard sighed and didn't disobey. He put away the elixir and carried Wu Yun. Every medicine had some poison. Moreover, the fire elixir was used to suppress the cold poison. It was originally the fire poison. He also knew that the more his master ate, the closer he was to death. He didn't want his master to eat too much. But when he saw his master cough, he was afraid that his master couldn't maintain the balance of ice and fire and would freeze to death. After locking Wu Yun up, Ling Qinglan didn't interrogate her. It was important to investigate the Lianshi cult, but the Linli building couldn't be underestimated. According to Mr. Li's tone, it was obvious that Mr. Li had confirmed his identity, and he even knew the relationship between the Yinma cult and the Shalu cult. He even suspected that Mr. Li was very clear about the relationship between the Tianya house and the Yinma cult, and he was very familiar with the way the Tianya house collected information. Otherwise, it was impossible that the Tianya house couldn't find out his origin. The only thing to be thankful for is that the Linli building showed kindness. Otherwise, my identity will be exposed. Ling Qinglan muttered to himself. Just thinking about it made him feel numb. According to Mr. Li's tone, he will go to Yunjing in the future. If he really wants to sell wine peacefully, he doesn't need to go to such a chaotic and dangerous place. After thinking for half a day, Ling Qinglan sighed. He couldn't distinguish whether the Linli building was a friend or an enemy. But since the arrangement of the Shalu cult was exposed, he naturally didn't dare to act rashly without Ling Mo's knowledge. Forget it. Let's solve the matter of the Lianshi cult first. How can we allow others to sleep? Ling Qinglan's eyes were as cold as a knife. He said, those demons and monsters are too greedy. On the other side, in the Linli building, people watched Su Li give Wu Yun to Ling Qinglan. Their reactions were different. Su Li, are we reckless this time? We don't even know the details of Ling Qinglan, but we give Wu Yun to him. If Ling Qinglan has a relationship with the Lianshi cult, won't it be bad? Chu Qingning looked worried, but his doubts were also the most concerned. Ordinary people couldn't enter Yunjing, and they didn't have any informants. How could they know the origin of Ling Qinglan? However, Fang Yuan thought that Su Li was likely to know Ling Qinglan, just like knowing Ling Li and Ling Yimo. After all, they were all surnamed Ling. Ling Qinglan is indeed his man. There is no doubt. Su Li glanced at Fang Yuan as if she had seen through his mind. She said lightly. Fang Yuan's eyes twitched, but Chu Qingning and others were still confused and didn't respond. However, when Chu Qingning saw Fang Yuan's unhappy face, he suddenly reacted and laughed. What's wrong? I see. Ling Qinglan is the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. If he wants to enter that place, he must have a clean background. It's really amazing that he can arrange people in there. Yin Xuedong and others were confused, but Chu Qingning didn't explain who Heath was. It was okay to talk about Ling Li's identity in private. If he said it like this, it was hard to guarantee that someone would hear. He and Fang Yuan still had this self-awareness. Talk less about him in the future. Don't worry about the matter of the Lianshi cult. Try to stay away from it. Su Li looked indifferent. She turned around and left without any hesitation. Tut! Chu Qingning was speechless. No one knew what he was sighing about. Fang Yuan's face softened a lot, and there was a very faint smile on his face. For 3 days in a row, Su Li didn't go to the Linli building again. Instead, she stayed quietly in the courtyard of the school and enjoyed the meticulous care of her eldest brother, Su Qingtan. 3 days later, a large number of troops suddenly emerged in the Qinghe town and surrounded the Jin and Lin families. Jin Jintian and Lin Xingrong were overjoyed. They thought that Yan Shixuan was forced to rebel, and they were about to use their private army. But when they saw that the leader of the army was not Yan Shixuan, but a young man in the black official uniform of the Supreme Court, their eyes widened, their hands and feet became cold, and they lost the power to resist. When did the people of the Supreme Judiciary arrive? They didn't receive any news. Seeing that the masters and lineal descendants of the two families were taken away, Yan Shixuan was instantly relaxed. The struggle that lasted for half a year finally came to an end. Looking at Ling Qinglan in front of him, who was in a black official uniform and looked serious, Yan Shishuan couldn't help but sigh. He tried his best but couldn't find any trace of Wu Yun. But Ling Qinglan just came to the Qinghe town for 2 days, and he caught Wu Yun from somewhere. His efficiency in solving the case was amazing. Ling Qinglan didn't know what method he used, but Wu Yun actually confessed what she had done. Even her relationship with the Jin and Lin families was clearly explained. Now the Jin and Lin families were completely unable to turn over the situation. They conspired to steal the official silver and colluded with the forces of the martial arts circle. The masters of the two families were bound to be beheaded. And the lineal descendants of the two families were also exiled. Lin Yanqing and Jin Rulan, who had a promising future, were completely reduced to stray dogs. Lin Xiang, who had just become Lin Yanqing's concubine, was even more dumbfounded. She was almost completely overwhelmed by regret and bitterness. She worked hard to get close to Lin Yanqing, but she ended up being exiled. If she behaved herself and was amiss at home, how could today's disaster happen? After this incident, Su Huanli was finally released. Although no one bullied him in prison, he was so scared that he lost a lot of weight. He was dispirited and listless. However, when he saw Su Qingtan in a black official uniform, he recovered quickly. He suddenly knew that the son of a high-ranking official in the capital city was more useful than any elixir. Su Qingtan, who knew what happened at home, didn't have a good face to Su Huanli. He just said a few words of concern and said nothing more. He said that he would go home to see his mother when he was free. He didn't even mention the names of Zhu Yan and Mam Su Chui. Su Huanli only thought that his son wanted to maintain his official prestige, so he agreed happily. He didn't realize that it was because of Su Li. After the Su family got rid of the suspicion, Su Qingtan thought that he could participate in the case soon. But Ling Qinglan didn't show up after waiting for a long time. He was confused and waited for 2 more days. Finally, he couldn't help but go to the Yen mansion. The satrap's mansion had specially set up a courtyard for Ling Qinglan to handle cases. Ling Qinglan's henchmen from Yunjing came in and out of the courtyard. Su Qingtan took a deep breath. He was also Ling Qinglan's henchman. On the surface, everyone knew that Ling Qinglan and the third prince were very close. But only his henchmen knew that Ling Qinglan seemed to be loyal to another mysterious force. But he was a newcomer, so he couldn't know more. In the National Academy where everyone had a backer, Su Qingtan was almost born in a poor family. Since ancient times, there was no noble son in a poor family, and he was no exception. Moreover, only after entering the National Academy, he knew that almost everyone who could be called the top talent in the National Academy was a martial arts genius. The Dahan country didn't have equal civil and military officials as the book said, but paid more attention to martial arts cultivation. As for him, in the National Academy, he could only be regarded as having a few skills. If Ling Qinglan didn't appreciate his character and accepted him in advance, he wouldn't have left the National Academy in advance and become the officer of the Supreme Judiciary with a bright future. At most, he would go back to the Qinghe town and be a useless low-ranking official. Chapter 137. Su Qingtan was nervous and slightly bowed his head. Do you want to ask why I don't take you to deal with the case when your Su family has been excluded? Did your performance disappoint me? Ling Qinglan smiled and glanced at Su Qingtan, who was speechless. He got up, picked up a file on the table and threw it to Su Qingtan. Look at this. Su Qingtan opened the file and glanced at it. His face immediately became gloomy. He finally knew why Ling Qinglan didn't find him. Because the Su family was still involved in the case. Su Huanli and his family came to the Qinghe town and secretly took orders from Wu Yun. The method of finding the official silver in the Byway building was ordered by Wu Yun. The person who did it was Su Huanli's first madam, who is also your first madam, Zhu Yan. Su Qingtan, your Su family has a lot to do with Wu Yun. How can I let you participate in the case? Ling Qinglan gently patted Su Qingtan's stiff shoulder and said with a smile, only you and I know the content of the file. Wu Yun is treacherous and cunning. It is inevitable that your family was instigated to make some mistakes. But the mistakes can be big or small. Su Qingtan, I leave the matter of your Su family to you. How about that? Su Qingtan's heart sank. After thinking for a moment, he clasped his hands and said respectfully, yes, sir. Ling Qinglan waved his hand indifferently and said, you can leave now. Do it as soon as possible. There are many cases in the capital city. There is no time to delay here. Su Qingtan nodded and left. He held the file in his hand, but it was very heavy as if he was holding a mountain. After he left, Ling Qinglan came to his sense and his eyes flashed with interest. Uncle Sean, what do you think he will choose? The middle-aged guard shook his head. He didn't know Su Qingtan. How could he know what he would do? Ling Qinglan patted his fan and sat down again. He said, I like Su Qingtan because he is righteous but not loyal. I can take this opportunity to test whether he is worthy to be trained as my successor. As for whether he was the successor of the Supreme Judiciary or Inma cult, no one knew. The middle-aged guard's expression changed slightly. Before he said anything, Ling Qinglan waved his hand and said casually, I know what you mean, but it's a pity. God doesn't give me face. I don't live as long as them. I've always liked to plan before I act, so it's better to prepare early for some things. Looking at Ling Qinglan's indifferent expression, the middle-aged guard felt sad. However, when Su Qingtan returned to his residence and looked at the files on the table, his eyes were full of struggle. Whether it was Su Zipei or Zhu Yan, he didn't have any burden to catch them. Their affection in the past had long been exhausted because they hurt Su Li again and again. If it weren't for the family relationship, he would even regard them as enemies. If his father and grandmother asked about it, this document would be enough. It was Su Li who really made him feel pressure. This girl was repeatedly abused by Zhu Yan and bullied by Su Zipei, but she never complained. In her heart, she still regarded the two dregs as her relatives. He also understood that just like his feelings for Li Yulian, Zhu Yan was Su Li's biological mother. Blood was thicker than water, so it was impossible to erase it. If he caught Zhu Yan, would Su Li hate him for it? Su Qingtan's knuckles turned white, and blue veins appeared on his forehead because of excessive force. He was not afraid of anything. In Yunjing, he was in danger again and again, and he even bravely faced death. But now, he was very afraid, in the courtyard of the school. Su Li looked at the clean bluestone road outside. It seemed that the eldest brother would not come today. She opened the drawer, took out the AO sword skills from the secret compartment, and felt it carefully. Anyway, she had some achievements in the realm of swordsmanship in her previous life. She understood the first 3 hurdles of the AO sword skills without any difficulty. She even had a lot of insights, which loosened the bottleneck of Su Li's swordsmanship. But since she saw the 4th hurdle, Su Li seemed to become an idiot and couldn't understand a word. She clearly knew the words on the sword book, but she couldn't understand the meaning when they were put together. Su Li didn't think that it was her problem. Although she was not smart, she was not so stupid that she couldn't understand the book. There must be a mystery in the 4th hurdle of the AO sword skills, but she hadn't figured it out yet. In the previous life, Sword Lord Ho's practice was smooth, and he didn't have any bottleneck in swordsmanship. Why is it different for me? Su Li frowned secretly and felt a little annoyed. Although she was entangled with mundane affairs, she certainly understood that cultivation was the foundation. Except for the days when she dealt with special events, she didn't slack off for a day. She also used ordinary medicinal materials in the pharmacy to make a lot of mediocre auxiliary medicines to assist her practice. In just half a year, her cultivation had reached the peak of the inborn third hurdle from the beginning of the inborn realm. She almost reached one realm in a month. Even Lingli, who had reincarnated, couldn't compare with her cultivation speed, let alone other people in the martial arts circle. However, Suli didn't mean to be complacent. She knew that there was always someone better than her. She even felt that her cultivation speed was slow and couldn't keep up with her plan. When the Linli building entered Yunjing, the inborn realm wouldn't be able to control it. So, she needed to step into a higher realm in a very short time. The framework of the Linli building is set up. It's time to order people to collect the news of the standard grade elixirs. Su Li's eyes flashed, and then she calmed down and immersed herself in the swordsmanship book again. This day was extremely quiet. Su Qingtan didn't pluck up the courage to come. In the next 2 days, there was no movement. Even Ling Qinglan, who had some confidence in him, gradually lost his smile. Could it be that this kid really burned the scroll? Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan finally received a servant's reply. Lord Su took people to a small inn. Clap. Ling Qinglan clapped his folding fan and smiled faintly. Don't disturb him. I'll go and have a look. At the same time, Su Li also received a message from Fang Yuan. She immediately figured out why Su Qingtan disappeared in the past 2 days. After thinking for a moment, she immediately dressed as Mr. Li and rushed to Zhu Yan's residence. Zhu Yan still lived in the small inn that Su Li chose. Even if she got the news that the Jin family and the Lin family fell, she didn't want to slip away. Because she knew that she and Su Zipei couldn't escape at all. Su Zipei ate the lunch served by the waiter in a low voice. After the people of the Jin family and the Lin family were arrested, she was shocked and wanted to escape. But her mother didn't leave, so she didn't dare to run around. Without her mother around, it was even a problem for her to go back to the Desu town. Fortunately, there were no soldiers in the past 2 days, which calmed Su Zipei's uneasiness a little. Mother, don't you come over to eat? After eating, Su Zipei turned back and said to the inner room. There was no response. She cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks and was about to take them downstairs. Suddenly, she felt the floor was shaking like an earthquake. Before she responded, the door was pushed open. A large number of soldiers rushed in and surrounded them. The innkeeper was still wailing, "Officer, it has nothing to do with me. I really didn't know that they were fugitives. Otherwise, how could I let them stay in the inn?" Su Zipei's face was as pale as paper. She was stiff all over. It seemed that even her eyes were frozen and couldn't move. The soldiers really came. It's none of your business here. Go down. The innkeeper was so scared that he went downstairs as if he had been pardoned. Su Zipei heard such a familiar voice and immediately turned her eyes. She saw the teenager who was obviously different from the officers and soldiers. She was immediately overjoyed. Eldest brother. Mother, come out quickly. It's the eldest brother. The eldest brother is an officer. We are fine. Zhu Yan, who was full of despair in the inner room, suddenly heard these words. She ran out regardless of her messy hair. When she saw Su Qingtan in black with a serious face, she suddenly cried out, "Qingtan, it's really you." Then, Zhu Yan directly rushed to Su Qingtan and hugged his waist tightly. She cried and said, "I'm confused. This time, I'm really wrong. Qingtan, you are successful now. You can definitely save me, right?" Su Zipei believed that Su Qingtan came to let them go this time. She pretended to stand behind her mother and said timidly, "Eldest brother, you didn't tell me and my mother that you came back. My mother and I have been worried about you these days." The confidants who came with Su Qingtan were also uncertain at this moment. If the two people in front of them were really the relatives of Lord Su, why did Lord Su come here to shield them? He has just become the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. How dare he do this? It's nothing. I've seen it many times. In the entire Supreme Judiciary, only Lord Ling is very clean and fair. Lord Ling values him so much, but he dares to act recklessly. What a pity. Several young people whose cultivation exceeded the acquired 8th hurdle transmitted the sound to each other. They looked at Su Qingtan with contempt. At the same time, on the roof of the second floor of the restaurant diagonally opposite the inn, Ling Qinglan and Su Li stood opposite each other. The middle-aged guard was vigilant and looked at Su Li with horror. Before they came up, they didn't notice that there were people here. Ling Qinglan was slightly surprised and then said with a smile, "Ms. Li, you are really well informed. So many elite soldiers of the Supreme Judiciary with extraordinary cultivation walk on the street. It's hard not to attract attention." Su Li seemed to explain. Then she pointed to the direction of the inn and handed out a pot of Liahua spirits. She said with a smile, "The play in front of us is a good one. It's wonderful to be accompanied by this thing." Ling Qinglan was stunned at first. Then he took it and smelled it. He couldn't help but laugh and said, "Ms. Li, you are really a sentimental person." The two people quieted down. The situation in the inn changed again. Su Qingtan's face was calm. Seeing the mother and the son acting, he didn't feel the slightest fluctuation in his heart. He even felt a little disgusted. He waved his hand, which was the gesture of capturing someone in the Supreme Judiciary. Several confidants who were transmitting the sound behind him immediately flashed different lights in their eyes. Then they instantly moved, pulled Zhu Yan away from Su Qingtan's waist, and pressed her firmly on the ground. "Ah!" Zhu Yan screamed. The person behind her was so strong that she almost thought that her arm was broken. "How dare you! I am the aunt of your lord. How dare you treat me like this?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.